You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's story, one that I have wanted to tell for quite some time about the platoon in Afghanistan that has been somewhat mislabeled the cursed platoon for things that have happened to them after a very notable incident. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But just a few reminders before we get started. As always, follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground, at Hazard Ground Podcast. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well subscribe to Kill Cliff's YouTube channel. If you're watching this podcast, you can get it either at Hazard Ground's YouTube channel or Kill Cliff's as well on our website, hazardground.com. You can view all of our podcasts as well. Speaking of hazardground.com, don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to the homepage and click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. You can do all of your normal Amazon shopping. Same thing on your smartphone. It'll redirect you directly to the app, and all your information is saved, credit card and everything. So it's really easy and user-friendly, but you do all your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities that you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. One final reminder, continue the Apple Podcast reviews coming, trying to still crack the top 100 podcasts. We need to get to at least 1,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We're over halfway there, so keep them coming. Again, doesn't have to be a long review, doesn't have to be a lengthy review. Just click 5 stars, give us a review. And we will continue to work our way up the top of the Hazard Ground, or the top of the Apple Podcasts. Let's get to this week's guest. He is a former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant who spent 16 years in the military, 12 of that in the 82nd Airborne, where he was part of the platoon where he was led into Afghanistan in 2012 by First Lieutenant Clint Lorance, who was eventually sentenced and imprisoned at Fort Leavenworth for military crimes and then pardoned by Donald Trump. And this is his story and the fallout of the members of himself and the platoon afterwards. He is Michael McGuinness joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Michael, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate the invite. I think this is an important thing to talk about, especially when we're talking in the scope of, I don't want to come off wrong, but American, interventionism, interventionist policy in these other countries where, we have leadership that doesn't exactly understand, what's going on. And we have instances like Clint and, old Eddie Gallagher and some of the other dudes that were given the pass. And
I mean, look, this is a story that I first read the Washington Post column. It was about a year and a half ago by Greg Jaffe. Was it Jaffe or Jaff, one way or another? It was a phenomenal, lengthy column that detailed everything that you and your fellow platoon mates went through from that fateful day in Afghanistan and everything that has happened afterwards. And I think this story is so important to tell for the sake of those guys who are still with you, but those who have lost their lives after the combat in Afghanistan, because I think that really speaks more to what those events led to than necessarily the events themselves. There could be a spirited debate, Mike, I'm sure, about what constitutes a war crime, what is exactly what deserves to be in prison, what doesn't, what's right, what's wrong in the context of combat. But that's not really what this story is about. This story is about you and your fellow platoon mates and what you guys have gone through in those days since 2012 in Afghanistan, and what is left of you guys and how you're still putting the pieces back together. And that's really kind of where I want to put our focus for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kicker of all this. Like, the military prepares you for, physically, arduous, training. It prepares you to go over and fight. It prepares you to fire a weapon proficiently. It prepares you for all these things. But what it doesn't prepare you for is moral injury and grief. Those are the two things the military just, for whatever reason, they kind of pay lip service to, but we never actually touch on it, right? Like, we haven't figured that out for whatever reason. And that's the big royal we, whether it's a veterans group or the active duty military, they just fail miserably at this part of addressing moral injury, and grief. I had a buddy just this past week that died, and I've been out for since 2015, and it doesn't get easier. It seems, honestly, it seems to get worse because like I turned 40 this year, and since 2012, I typically go to 2 funerals every summer. And this is something that should be happening. And like when we're 70 or 80, at the tail end of our lives, but instead we get another 20, 30, 40 years of this prior to getting to that. But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest kicker in all this is like when you don't have the tools to adequately deal with one, especially for me, like you said, there is a spirited debate. How I feel about it is Clint Lorance is a war criminal. And I feel that, we were kind of thrown under the bus by our squadron and brigade command because they just wanted this to go away. You got to think this incident happened on the heels of Robert Bales, just 20K west of where he was. So hey, we make it quick, we make it quiet, and we just prosecute, right? Mm-hmm. But we multiple NCOs and soldiers both tried to stop him from issuing the order, and he blew us off. Right. And that's the frustrating part is we could have been saved this headache if he would have just taken a quick time out and listened, especially to the people that had been there for 4 months at that point already.
Right. Well, again, it's funny because the Army gives you a manual for everything, right? They give you a manual how to do everything, even how to write memos. They give you a manual, yet no one sat down to write down the manual for, and there is no manual for combat and how to deal with everything that comes with it. But we'll get more into that. And the deployment you were referring to is one of 3 for you in Afghanistan, the final one that you had. But we always like to start back at the beginning, Mike, and how and why you got in the Army.
Well, I needed a job. I graduated high school early. And I lived in a steel town where the mill closed. So it was like my last year of high school, I just I went to Kent State University and all I did was fuck around and, didn't really apply myself in school. So like my grades were okay. I was at Kent State, but like I was a 17-year-old kid, like screwing around on a college campus. Like, come on, was I really doing anything? No, absolutely not. So, I mean, I made the decision to enlist. It got me, it made me grow up when, especially when you're joining the military at 17 years old. I mean, one, I don't think that should be allowed. I think we should have to wait a little bit till like our brains are formed, rather than sending a 17-year-old kid, away from home, to go screw around with his buddies all day and, fire rifles for a living.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I did the same thing, except I went the officer route. Like, one of the main reasons in the pre 9/11 world I did ROTC was to pay for college. It was an end. Lo and behold, 9/11, made all of us look at the world a little bit differently. But you got into this whole thing sort of not really knowing what you were getting into. Did you do any reading ahead of time? Did you study up on what it was going to be like, or you just threw caution to the wind?
No, I was like, the hell with it. Let's do it. My whole family did the Air Force. My dad's side of the family, and they were crushed when I decided to go into the Army. They're like, what, you don't want to, like my aunt's a disaster relief specialist. I had another aunt who was like Intel, and they're like, you could do these, you're smart. And I'm like, no, man, I'm 17 years old. And if I'm putting a uniform on, I'm going to go, fuck around overseas and kill bad guys. Like, that typical 17-year-old stuff. And as I got older, it got less about that and more about like, I have these young kids that, and I shouldn't call them kids, but they were my kids at the time, but these were my guys, and I have to make sure they're trained up because how it went, the op tempo just picked up and it kept getting faster and faster and faster, and you had less and less time to train. So that was how I kind of shifted my focus, was like, I'm not this piss and vinegar, full of piss and vinegar kid anymore. I'm this kind of seasoned dude, even though I was still only like 21, 22 years old, and it's my job to help train, younger soldiers. And then especially once I made sergeant after my first deployment, I really took that seriously. And I probably stressed out a little bit more about it than I should have. How that goes, man. You think about too hard on something, it just kind of weighs on you. But yeah, man, I mean, I did absolutely zero research. I've always been into history, and I was like, wow, man, these guys were fighting wars and, defending freedom and all that, the main chords that you strike when you initially talk to a recruiter. But I mean, I just went.
So you just jump into this thing in the deep end. What was your basic training experience like? Was it shock and awe for you?
Yeah, because I had never fired a rifle. That was an adjustment. And honestly, I was the dude that always, like, when I was in high school, I always took like the easy way out. So I was like the dude in basic training that would like make my rack and tighten it down and just sleep on the floor underneath it, that way I'd have to remake it in the morning, but I mean, it was a great learning experience. One of my drill sergeants would end up being my first sergeant on my first deployment. Oh, wow. which was kind of a mind fuck, because like, when you're walking into a battalion building to go sign in when you first get there, right? The last thing you want to hear is your drill sergeant's voice coming from the second floor. And I literally walked back to my company. I was like, I'm not signing in here. Can I go somewhere else? And they were like, no, dude, you gotta, like, there you go.
That's kind of awesome. So how quickly after basic training do you get to your unit and then to your first deployment?
Well, I mean, I didn't deploy initially until 2008. So I had a lot of time. Yeah. To kind of.
How did that happen?
Well, I was in a mechanized unit for a little bit, and then I gave the Q course a shot, which I didn't make it. And then, with being a holdover, I'm not going to lie, I was like, I'm not going back to a mech unit. I just don't want to. And I initially had orders to Korea, and I literally told one of the SWIT cadre, I'm not going to report. And they were like, you know what, fuck it, we'll just send you to the 82nd. So when I got to the 82nd, they were in the middle of ITC. They were prepping to go. And then next thing 2008, we went, it was 2007 and 2008. That was the 15-month. So 07 was the first time I deployed. So I had a way too long, window where I didn't deploy and I really wanted to, but I also was figuring, hey man, I did, 3.5 years in a mech unit. I know what I'm doing. I'm a corporal. I'd be a great Green Beret. And, I made it to, later in the course. And I wasn't academically really that great. I got hurt. And then it was like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Like, I'm just not cut out for it. I gave it a shot. I found out the hard way, and, that was all right. And I could still hold my head up knowing that 70% of those guys still fail, like
you're with the majority, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So when you get to this first deployment in Afghanistan, what are you told? What's your mission? And sort of what are your expectations heading into it?
Well, we went to RC East, and I'll tell you right now, that was miserable because, like, just walking off the plane, you land in Bagram and the air is already so thin. I'm like, are you kidding? This is going to suck, right? And we're sharing battle space with what we thought were 4 brigades, right? But by the end of that 15 months, which we only thought was going to be 12, it was just us in the 173rd, like, in that, holding down that entire area. So like, we got thin on the ground. I'm not going to sit here and say we had anywhere near the experience, the 173rd guys had. I think it's been pretty documented how rough their 2007, 2008 deployment was. But, we were told that we were there to essentially, initially we worked out of Ghazni. We guarded the ring route, that freshly paved road that goes around the entire country. Did a lot of mounted operations. And then we started splitting up. Our company split up. We had our main kind of hub at Four Corners, which was an old kind of like Russian compound that, of course, we threw the HESCOs up. We, made an LZ. We covered in gravel naturally, and then, built a gigantic burn pit. And eventually we got B huts and all that other stuff. But, that was a process. But like, we weren't expecting the winners we got in RC East. We thought we were going into this really, damning and hospitable hot area. And not to say it wasn't, but we were not prepped for like, oh, it's cloudy out. And then 2 hours later, oh, now we're knee deep in snow. So that that was kind of a mind-blowing experience. But like on that first deployment, we maybe in 15 months got into 20, 25 ticks, my platoon. But our sister platoons had a couple of combat losses. Our company mortars NCO, he was killed. So like that was an interesting first deployment, because like it's what we always talk about deployments, right? It's a lot of waiting around for just a few minutes of action, right? And that was the entire 15-month deployment. And the thing is like going into it, we didn't know it was going to be 15 months. We literally found out from like a spouse sending a message saying, yeah, we saw a Good Morning America that you guys are getting extended. And we were like, well, we haven't heard anything. And then 3 weeks later, brigade sends a memo down like, yeah, we're getting extended to 15 months rather than 12.
Damn you pesky media folks for the punch. Geez, always the last to know, right? But you talked about some of the casualties you guys sustained. I know it wasn't anybody directly in your platoon or somebody that you may have known directly, but did any of that start to, resonate with you or jar you a little bit in your head about how difficult combat could be emotionally and the stressors that are involved in it?
Well, I mean, the kicker is like, I knew Casey, Sergeant Combs. He was a really good dude. But it kind of, when you have your first combat loss, and like you said, maybe it wasn't in your platoon or your squad, but within your company, like it really shatters that idea that it's not going to be me, right? Like I can't get hurt. And that's, I think, I don't want to say I didn't take all these things seriously going into it, but it kind of put them more into focus, like paying attention to ground signs for IEDs, making sure my rifle was zeroed at all times, making sure that, after we got back off of mounted missions, I cleaned that thing to hell and God to make sure it was able to function, in the next firefight, it made me focus more on those things and kind of get that idea that it can't be me out of my head, because at that point, it could be you, right? Yeah. Like our battalion S3 was killed on that deployment, right? Like, when does a major get shot? Like that's how a lot of us looked at it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important lesson to learn, that it could always be you. But it's kind of dealing with that ideation. Like, yes, there is a possibility I could be wounded or killed, but I still have a job to do. I still have duties and responsibilities. But yeah, I mean, that's an important lesson to learn. You can't, like, I have younger soldiers like much later on that were like, we're going to be so trained up, it's going to be less likely. I'm like, less likely doesn't mean not going to happen. So, make sure you're really paying attention to those things that we're supposed to be doing while on patrol.
I tell you, for me, it really hit me. It wasn't even the, idea that it was somebody that I didn't have a close relationship with, but the first casualty loss we sustained, it was the memorial service. When you see the boots, the M16, the dog tags, the Kevlar, you saw pictures of that stuff before, and you always knew what it represented and what it meant. But until you go to one of those things and you stand in front of there and you salute, and what's even more jarring is to see, grown adults, men and women, bawling their eyes out and being brought to tears at the loss. And that's when the kind of devastation of the whole thing, at least for me personally, really kind of got me and really made me understand the magnitude of loss in combat and how hard it can be. And then how quickly you sort of have to scan and discard all those emotions immediately, and figure out where to store them in time to get back out there for your next mission. And that, that sort of behavior, which is a expectation, albeit more often than not an unrealistic one, for any human in any circumstance. But we are forced very quickly to take those emotions, put them away, and go right back to work. Because that's what the mission requires, right? Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, we could sit here and try to figure out a way to give soldiers a way to take a couple of days off, or, take a knee on this one. But none of us ever are conditioned to do that, because that's not how we're trained.
Yeah.
We're trained to get back most of us are trained to get back in the fight, because that's what we know. And so, and where I was going with all this, Mike, I'm trying to just, for lack of a better way to phrase it, build some background about what you were walking into and what the aftermath of 2012 was for you guys, because I'm not sure if there was anything that might have happened prior to it that could have prepared you for it all. But I'm just kind of curious how much of the trauma was sort of compounded by previous trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I would honestly say my second deployment is where like my struggles to deal with it really started, because in the Arghandab, that place doesn't give a damn, right? Like by the end of that deployment in 2009, 2010, our Charlie company was essentially combat ineffective. You know, and we were, you know, this is the thing, like, it seems like the units I was in the 82nd kind of got the short end of the stick, because in 2009, 2010, we moved from working out of Kalat and then moved down into the Arghandab after Morlock and his people in 2ID decided that they were just going to go around rampaging in the villages along the river, right? And so they pushed 2ID out. We moved in behind them, and we were not expecting the kind of fight we got. And it was hard fighting. This was our first real kind of introduction to IEDs being used against dismounted personnel. Like we saw it a lot on the 15-month deployment against our vehicles and during mounted missions, but we didn't see them used a lot against, us on the ground. And we had that was an awful deployment. I lost quite a few buddies on that one. And, it kind of, like you said, you can't even take the knee, right? Because at this point, you're a staff sergeant, you're a squad leader, a platoon sergeant, a company commander, a PL. When you're in those positions, you can't even take a timeout for 10 minutes for yourself, let alone, do any real kind of, I guess, like kind of self-care, right? Like you just don't have the time because you're worried about how the guys are dealing with it. We had a guy named Nick Stone, literally, just a few feet in front of me, he had his leg blown off, and, Nick's laying on the ground, returning fire. Right. And then he looks off to his right. He just sees his foot, like standing straight up and down, or the lower half of his leg. And that kind of, showed me that this fight isn't going to get better no matter what the leadership is telling us. This is going to keep being kind of like a very rough fight in a very capable enemy's backyard.
You mentioned the leadership. What was your previous leadership like on your first two deployments? I mean, obviously, again, you're at a platoon level, so you're dealing with lieutenants, some more junior than others, but some have more experience than others. But what was, in general, your company level leadership like prior to that third deployment? Were they guys you trusted and had faith in?
Well, my first deployment, I had a great command team all the way down for the most part, right? My company commander was all right, but we had a great first sergeant, we had Martin Schweitzer as our brigade commander. And that guy did whatever he could for the boys on the ground. We had a great brigade sergeant major, command sergeant major, and sergeant major Flowers, who was all of the same mind, right? So, like, if they could support us, they would. And those first two deployments, like especially in the Arghandab, where the fighting got very rough, and we had some changeover at the top of battalion, and even our brigade. Like we had, I don't know if you remember the drink wine incident where his wife was on brag, like threatening the other wives and like using her position as the brigade FRG leader. Like it was just a mess, right? But like,
as a brigade FRG person have over somebody else.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing. Like she was like, well, my husband's the brigade commander, so obviously you have to listen to me. And it's like, no,
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, they're all civilians. Who gives a shit what you have to think, So we had a lot of changeover at the top, but we lost my company commander on the second deployment. We had a pretty good dude come in again. I had great leadership at the platoon level for the most part. And when it wasn't good, we had a great support system as squad leaders and team leaders to kind of, okay, this dude or this person is an idiot, but, we still have to maintain mission. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So, I mean, it was nice. We had a good support system, and I got spoiled. I had great leadership. Like what killed me is on my second rotation, Steve Kwok ended up being my PL, and I remembered him as a staff sergeant, right? Like, yeah, like, and he was just this amazing, amazing leader, and he and I clicked right off the bat. Like it was great. And when he moved out, because in an infantry battalion, it's like everybody's got to get a CIB. So yeah, Steve, you've done 5 months here. We got to get a new guy in. We got a brand new, second lieutenant by name of Pete Forche, who was an amazing leader, absolutely amazing. He just was very, he was not like your typical infantry PL. He was very reserved, very, very analytical. So like when orders came down, you'd immediately start to see the gears turning, and we'd sit down and have a quick powwow, and it's like, all right, man, this is what we got to do. And he was a good planner. Like it was like I got spoiled with some of my PLs, and that's what I expected out of my PLs. Like to kind of, I need you to plan well. We'll sit down and talk. I will always do what I'm supposed to do, but I like to be allowed to work. I think at this point in my career, that's what I wanted. And for like, I mean, I'm not even kidding, man, probably 5 years, I had PLs that would let me do that. And it was nice.
Yeah. And I mean, from the officer side, I wish there were more of leaders who tried as hard as they could to relate to the ground level. And look, not that it's an excuse, but as you move up the ranks and you get further away from that, your view changes and your understanding of the battle space changes, and what you're in charge of changes. So that affects a lot of your decision making. But at the platoon level, it's always been a goal of mine to make sure that the people at that level understand the scope of what they have to do and what they need to do to be successful. And that's really just work as a complete team, if there is a thing to do at that level, and trust everybody unequivocally. And the fact that you had good leaders there, I think is important, because it allows you to easily see the contrast once you got what you ended up with Clint Lorance, that it was going to be somebody exactly who is the antithesis of that. And automatically it just creates a sense of mistrust, that you don't ever really want to be there. Right. I mean, it just creates a certain level of that split second where you have to double think about what they're telling you because you don't trust them. And sometimes that can be the difference between life and death, or good and bad in battle. Right. I mean, those are the kind of moments that you don't want to have to deal with when it comes to leadership.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I always told all my guys, my squad, like, you're going to learn more from bad leadership than you are good leadership. And they would just kind of sit there and look at me, and I'm like, you'll know a bad leader when you see it. And when you become a leader, you do the exact opposite of what they did. And you're probably going to come out pretty, looking pretty good. And then you just build on that. And so like, I mean, when I got to the 82nd, there were a lot of young leaders. So you saw kind of like the hiccups, but I had, like I said, I was spoiled. I had all these combat deployed guys that had shared what they what they knew with me. I had great squad leaders. And like I said, when I became a leader, I had a series of outstanding PLs that, like you said, shared, what we needed to do to make mission, but also, and I agreed with this 100%, to let the guys know, listen, we look micro, brigade looks macro. Like, don't try, like, for us, we can't win the war by ourselves, but what we could do to at least help out with that is make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to in this particular section of this province.
Control your piece of the pie.
Yeah. And a lot, you know how it is. And I'm sure you probably ran across them, especially since you were commissioned. You have like younger leaders that are like, well, I mean, I read this book or I did this, or I've experienced this, and maybe we should try it this way. And it's like, bro, not the time, not the place. Okay.
Everyone's got a great idea that they got in a book until, as Mike Tyson says, the first bullet flies by your head, and that book does the same thing. Yeah. You mentioned how taxing your second deployment was from a loss standpoint and everything else. And we've also touched on, the idea that you don't get a chance to take a knee. When you get back from that second deployment, is there a sense at all within you that this stuff is compounding, and without really even recognizing it, it may start to become more than what you mentally were ready for. I mean, is there a sense that you might have dawned on yourself, maybe I need to take a breath on this one?
Looking back on it now, that is exactly what I should have done, right? Like I should have asked, like maybe I go work in the schoolhouse. We have an NCO academy. I was a staff sergeant. All I needed to do was ALC, and I would have been like, check, you are fully fledged staff sergeant at this point. And I could have pursued that, but I didn't. I was like, you know what, I got to go back. And, I made the dumb soldier self-prognosis that, to snap out of this funk, I'm just going to drown myself in alcohol, which was a horrible mistake. I was really, I'm not gonna lie, man, I became a pain in the ass for a short period of time before I made the decision I wouldn't say I went and talked to somebody like in any real way. But I, went and talked to the chaplain a few times. He laid some coping mechanisms down for me. I'm like, okay, I'm fine. I'm cured. There's nothing wrong with me now. But, like I was still, exhibiting all the negative behaviors, with the overconsumption of alcohol, with, I was pushing my family away. I was just like, listen, if this is what I'm going to be doing, I need to withdraw more from my family. That way it's less of a sting if something does happens, and I moved from 2nd Bat 508 over to 473, where I kind of got my footing again. Brian Menace got the authorization to set up coin platoons, which is the dumbest name ever, but it's essentially any able-bodied male at the time that he could get his hands on. We're going to go plus up Rista squad, a Rista platoon up to an infantry-sized platoon. So like one of my 240 gunners was a 13 Bravo. I had a couple 11 Chucks as ammo bearers. Our RTO was an 88 Mike. And then we were a mixed, kind of a mixed bag of 19 Deltas and 11 Bs. So like, I was like, okay, well, there's going to have to be a lot of training to be done, right? Like I can do this. And it gave me something to kind of focus in on, right. Which I did. And then I'm not going to lie, when, they did the newcomers brief, like almost a month and a half after I'd been there. Okay. The squadron sergeant major and the squadron commander were like, yeah, we're going into RC South. And when they showed us on the map, I was like, son of a bitch, that it was only like 25K from where we were in the Argonne. And I got up and I walked out the back and just lit up a cigarette. And all the guys that came over from 2508 with me did the same. And Sergeant Major came out and was like, well, why did you guys leave? And we're like, because you're telling all these people that this is going to be this great adventure. We just left there. And that place fucking sucks. Like, this is not an adventure, Sergeant Major. This is bad, man. This is really, really bad. And he's, he just sat there and was like, well, it's something to think about. And I was like, oh, Jesus, this is going to suck dick,
Yeah, I've already thought about it. I've come to the conclusion this will suck. You don't need to tell me anything more.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is like when I first got to 473, we had this amazing sergeant major, and like I said, we didn't have time to do a newcomers brief because we were in like ITC. We're trying to figure out how these platoons are going to work. So they just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And you know how a colonel is. We have new soldiers. We have to do a brief. Okay, dude. This particular sergeant major who I'm not very fond of, he talked like this and he would say, hey man, get on the, check these blocks and get on the team. And we're just like, oh, I fucking hate you, dude.
It's just side note, totally anecdotal. You described that guy and I know exactly what you're talking about. And immediately in my head, there's like 3 sergeant majors who I've just picked out throughout my career who do the exact same thing. Yeah. It's really funny how we can typecast ranks like that. And it's always the same ranks. It's either colonels, sergeant majors, or, the lowest ones, the privates, the specialists, and the lieutenants. So yep. It's just weird. Anyway, so you're heading back there. Was anything different about your mission heading to RC South than the previous ones?
Well, it was this whole coin platoon thing, right? They were really leaning into counterinsurgency. And I kind of looked at it this way, like, as I got a little bit older, like I got focused on, hey, when I retire, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be a historian, and all I read is history, and that's the way it's been for 20 years now, right? And I'm just sitting there like, counterinsurgency is this nice new shiny thing that David Petraeus reached up on a shelf and he pulled it down and he dusted it off and then he rewrote a few things, right? Like honestly, the United States does not do it well. Historically, does not do it well, right? And the thing is, in 2011, if you would have went up to any staff officer or any senior staff NCO and asked them what counterinsurgency was, and there were 20 of them, you were getting 20 different answers, right? It's just like pacification during Vietnam. Well, what's pacification? Nobody knew. They just knew they had to do it, right? So that's how I looked at it. And my first PL on that deployment, Dominic Latino, we were sitting down in the office one day after a jump, and he's just like, dude, I don't even know what the hell we're doing. And I sat down and told him, I'm like, you're not supposed to. In counterinsurgency, no one knows how to do this. So we're just going to have to figure it out, and make sure that we're not just focusing on like the combat aspect of the mission. We also have to focus on that kind of, what do you call it? The civilian aspect of the mission as well. Right. So, Dom was just, hearts and minds. Right. But Dom was just kind of like, oh man, I don't know. But he was knocking that job out of the park before he got wounded on that deployment. But like the platoon I went to was great. I ran the platoon for about 3 months, got them trained up. And it was just a lot of fun. You had a lot of young soldiers that, and I told them right where we were going, and I showed them pictures from my second rotation, and they were like, damn. I was like, yeah, keep that in mind. Not the great adventure that Tweedledee and Tweedledum up at Squadron are telling us it's going to be, but this is serious work. And the harder we work here, the more prepared we are over there, and they did, they took to it. When Sergeant Ayers, my platoon sergeant, came in, he was just like, bro, these guys are ready to go. And I was like, I told you, we've been working really hard, and we're glad to have you here, man. And I was like, dude, just let me know what you need. I'm here. You can. And the thing is, we came up with the role where he was the nice NCO and I was the dickhead. So whenever he needed yelling to be done, I went out and screamed and yelled, and that way he could be the good cop, like it was just such a great platoon to be in. And we were all incredibly, like, stupidly close. Like how a platoon is, like, you're close. But like, and I had great platoons that I was in before, but this one was just something else, man. We're kind of, like I said, we had 11 Bravos and 19 Deltas and 88 Mikes and 11 Charlies and 13 Bravos, like we had all these guys that were just thrown together to do counterinsurgency, with nobody really knowing how to do that. And we were just like, we'll take it one day at a time when we get there.
A couple of things I just wanted to kind of revisit for a moment. You talked about your LT who was wounded prior to Lorance getting there and him having that conversation with you in reference to not knowing what was going on or not knowing what you're doing. Are you the type of guy that when you hear that from your leader, you sort of take that vulnerability as something good and you can have an open, honest conversation with them? Or does that sort of scare you a little bit that your leadership is admitting they basically don't know what's going on and what's next?
No, I thought it was a good thing. I think that's important. I would rather have a guy tell me, hey, I have no clue. And then that way we can sit down, take that kind of tactical pause and draw up a plan to get from point A to point B or whatever, whatever the requirement for that day is, right? Then somebody who just is like, nope, somebody who doesn't know what's going on, just like hard charging it through like bull in its china shop, as well as I do, that rarely, if ever, ends well, and so I appreciated that. And like I said, Dom was a phenomenal planner as well. Like I said, I stressed that to my lieutenants, and that's what I looked for. I didn't want a lieutenant to know everything. I didn't want a lieutenant to be like the most proficient person, because that comes with doing the job more and longer, right? But if you're a good planner, that is a nice base that we can build on and move forward with. And he was, I'm pretty sure his knuckles dragged the ground, but he was a phenomenal planner.
Were you surprised at how well this unit of sort of misfits, if you will, gelled together?
Oh, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. I mean, Brett Frace, who's still in the military, he's a sergeant first class now. He's a truck driver by trade, and he's like, well, now I'm in a combat unit as the RTO, and he didn't piss, moan, or complain about it. He was just like, I'm here. I had one of my great friends who's a first sergeant now in the 82nd, Joe Morrissey. He was a reclass from like a mechanic to a 19 Delta. And he was, the first day I met him, he had like his sleeves cuffed inside, which I have no issues with, but he had a Live Strong bracelet on, and he's inside the office with one of our branch detail PLs that was there before Latino got there. And he's just sitting there having a conversation with them. And I'm like, why are you in the office? You're a specialist. And he's like, well, listen, man, like I'm one of the only leaders here. And I'm like, all right, cool, but you're not a sergeant. I was like, get the fuck out. Right. And I looked at Lieutenant Maluro and I'm like, sir, what's going on? Like, why are you letting him in here? He's like, well, Sergeant, we don't have any other NCOs here because for whatever reason, Squadron sent literally almost every NCO to NCOES at the same time when we're like trying to prep to go into the field in the following week or two. And I'm just like, it's letting the chickens run around, with no supervision. So like I go into the cage room and I just hear Morrissey, oh, this fucking stocky motherfucker, thinks he can just come in here and tell me what to do. Like, I can't believe this, da 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 da. And there was a specialist, I'm not even kidding you, his name was Marshall Rambo. He was like 6'4", like blonde hair, blue eyes, and just stood over everybody. He's like, you mean that dude? And Morrissey turns around and was just like, oh, damn it. And I just walked up to him and I cut the Live Strong bracelet off his wrist. And I was like, damn well, you can't wear this in uniform. And he was just like, oh. And after that, we've been great friends since, I mean, but it was such a weird, just little group, and we knew it. And we were just like, you know what, fuck it. We're going to throw in together because that's the best way for us to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, coincidentally, I had sort of the same thing thrown together on my first deployment. There were 3 different platoons that were sort of mishmashed together for me to command. And, when I tell you, I've never seen the amount of infighting that you couldn't even make it up. E7s from different platoons fighting with each other, who wanted to play acting first sergeant, who didn't. I mean, it was garbage. It was awful. And you get a lot of headstrong people together, and it could be a bad recipe. On the flip side, you get the right people together. I don't think the rank matters. I don't think the positions matter. I think everybody sort of works towards the same goal. And it took a long time. You probably, almost 3/4 of the deployment to get everybody to a place where they could coexist. Thankfully I was able to kind of farm some people out to different locations where they didn't have to cross paths with each other every day. But it can go horribly wrong when they do that. It's definitely a roll of the dice by putting people together from different units. I mean, anybody knows that too. When we've had guys on the podcast tell the story, I just entered into a new unit and they had been training up for months to go to deployment. I get there and a week later we leave, and I'm the FNG sort of, and he's the outcast walking into this band of brothers, if you will, to overuse a phrase, but you get the point sort of. Yep. So you can see how that whole sort of, relationship and conglomeration of things can be good or bad.
Yeah. I mean, but like I said, we lucked out. Like we were just like, it seems like our squadron doesn't know really what Colonel Menace, the brigade commander, wanted, right? Again, it's counterinsurgency. Nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody. I'm sorry, not even Petraeus knew what the fuck he was doing. Like, and I will swear up and down until my dying day that man, like, he rode that to the top, and then, what happened is what happened. But, just him putting his name on that manual. Like when that was like the hot word everywhere was, how do you fight counterinsurgency? Well, dude, again, none of us know how to do it. None of us know how to do it. It's something we figure out when we get there, but like trying to set up, this is how we do coin prior to, because what works in one province isn't going to work in another. You have to be, semper gumby, always flexible, right? Like, and damn well, there's a lot of commands that aren't, and in 4th Brigade, the higher ups after Uncle Marty left, the higher ups were not the flexible type. It was like, do it my way. And then once it trickled down to us, we're like, no, we'll meet the intent, but we're going to do it our way,
All right. So when do you get there in 2012?
We got there in February. And within the second day we were at McGuinness, I found out my grandfather had passed, and then my buddy from 2508 was killed in a blue on green, which sucked. Like, that's not how I really wanted to start the deployment.
Did you get the details of the blue on green incident?
Yeah. It was my buddy, Jordan Bear. He was a staff sergeant, or he might have been. Yeah, I think he was a staff sergeant. But he was just doing a tower check, and him and another young soldier were in the tower, and the Afghan army person that was buddied up with him turned his weapon on them both before being killed himself. So, like, I had never dealt with that, right? Like, I've never had to deal with the kind of the presence of, hey, you're buddied up with these Afghans, you're going to have to keep an eye on them as well, because like the partner units that I had in Afghanistan, for the most part, were pretty good. Like, they fought their asses off, especially when we were in the Arghandab, and now it's just like, geez, man, like, you gotta be kidding me. This is not what we need right now. Yeah. And then we went into a place, give me a second, man. I'm trying to remember the name. It was outside of Sarkari Karez. It was hot. We did a lot of mounted stuff, a lot of dismounted stuff. There was a village that we were trying to conduct coin operations in. And like, our first day on the ground, we got into like this 9-hour firefight. It was gnarly as hell. Wow. And both platoons, in a risk platoon or troop, you only have 2 platoons, you don't have 3, so like, if one platoon's out, we're like on guard, we've got like a QRF fired up, like, it was really hectic, and I wasn't used to running that short because I'm used to there being 3 platoons, so I mean, it was go, from day one. And the guys, they realized, hey, this is going to be rough, and then, we're getting word that the IED threat for dismounts is much higher than it is than vehicles, because they know they can do more damage that way. Well, we have these mine hounds that overheat within 20 or 30 minutes, and then we had this old crusty EOD guy, total boss, man by the name of Israel McGuinness, who was was sitting down and teaching young soldiers how to spot, wires and munitions that had been like dug in and buried. Like, he was just he was so awesome, man. So we started getting, kind of getting weird with how we would mark the trails we walked, right? We used baby powder or talcum powder during the day, and we would crack IR chem lights at night and just dump them out as we walked. That way people could see, like, this path is cleared, this is good to go. When we started running out of stuff like that, we would drop poker chips because everybody wanted to send us poker sets, so we would throw poker chips down, like, hey, just follow the chips, so we got really crafty with how we were doing things, and I think we were doing a really good job there. But then we got pushed out by 2ID because, like, a lot of the operations dealt with monitoring movement on improved roads. We have MATVs and things like that, but they have strikers. Mm-hmm. They're a little more built to that. So we swapped out and moved a little further south into Garaban, that area. And that's where our brigade HQ was. And then we were kind of dispersed throughout. And that's when we got into Panzai. And, I guess the deployment kind of got very different. Like, we were used to being on the ground, but where we were at before, it was very wide open for the most part. Here, very condensed, grape rows, a lot of irrigation ditches, and these weren't like small grape rows. Like, these were like almost 8-9 feet tall. So, like, you're going up and over each and every one because you can't walk on the roads, right? Mm-hmm. Or any of the paths. So, like, this was rough going. And when we got to Garaban, we're doing, Captain Swanson, who was an amazing troop commander, was like, all right, well, first you're going to move out and you're going to go into PK, or Panzai, head out there. 2ID has like a small cop, and you're going to go occupy it, right? Well, when we got to Garaban, there's like a mess tent, there's Alaska tents with AC. We're just kind of like, oh man. But we're like, hey, it's a cop, so there's going to be something there, right? No. It took us 9.5 hours to move 3K. And we got hit right before we got to the gate, right? I was the weapons squad leader at this point, and before we pushed off, I'm like, all right, guys, this is going to suck, but we're taking every linked 7.62 round we can get our hands on. We had the Gustav, which was a big-time game changer. We're going to bring every goose round we can get our hands on, bring extra socks, bring extra T-shirts, and an extra pair of pants. They're like, but everybody else is just carrying an assault pack. I'm like, dude, we don't know if we're coming back to Garaban. Like, we had a tent we were allowed to stow shit in, but like, we don't know when we're going back, right? And I was the smart one because we didn't go back there for 6 weeks. So I felt justified in loading everybody, including myself, down. Okay. So, but like we get hit, like I passed off a round bag, these guys kind of, the egress, and I just grabbed my round bag, and like my crotch is busted, in my pants, because frac U's are awful. I'm just dragging this empty round bag in, and I'm expecting to see tents and everything. There is nothing inside this cop. It's literally 3 strikers strong pointed at the corners. It has a gate with way more sea wire than they needed. There was a freezer unit there that wasn't hooked up to a generator. There was like a 12 by 6 foot like slat with a camo net over top, and then a road grader. That was it. And as soon as we got there, those guys loaded up the strikers and got the fuck out. Yes. And I'm just sitting there like, oh man, this is going to be so bad. And then what really pissed me off is the squadron commander and the squadron sergeant major show up in an aircraft and land inside. I took every cigarette I had with me, and the squadron commander comes up and starts bumming smokes from me as he's standing there for like 2 hours. And I'm just like, this is all I have, man. This is all I have. Why are you taking from me?
I mean, did you ask them like, WTF? What are we doing here? Was there any of those conversations?
I'm going to tell you right now, a Lieutenant Latino is not what you would call smooth with his words. He's very blunt, even to this day. And Dom was trying to maintain military bearing, and be respectful and be the good leader that he is. But he just looks at him and goes, "Sir, what the fuck?"
Yeah,
that's all.
So that would have been.
Yeah, that's all he said. And Colonel Howard's like, "Listen, we're going to get tents here. We're going to do all this. We're going to do all that." And the tents eventually got there like a week before Lorance did. So we had 2.5 months of literally just sleeping in the dirt, with no way to like really cool off or sustain ourselves until someone, I don't know what happened. Like, we did a water resupply, and our distro came out and just dumps a generator that I don't know how we got hooked up to the freezer, but we got it running. And so we just stuffed it full of water, the little chow we had. And then what we started doing is, if you weren't on guard or on SOG, you would go stand in the freezer, or you would go to that road grader and just sit in the cab with the AC on to try and cool off.
That's about right. Make do with what you got.
Yeah.
You guys had sustained some casualties up to the events of July 2nd. Was there a sense for you that, like, between after what happened on the first deployment and you get more stuff on the second deployment, now you're here, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you have these extreme austere conditions, and your guys are already getting wounded. Did you think that, hey, I'm not going to make it out of here alive?
I mean, I had thoughts that this was going to be the one that got me, because like IEDs, like small arms fire, I'm okay with that all day of the week. I like my chances, especially running the weapon squad. Like I felt I've got the firepower here between, the 240, the Goose, and I managed to finagle a 320. So I was like, I've got my bases covered here, right? But then IEDs, though, you can't beat those things, right? And the mine hounds they give you, like I said, they're overheating after 30 to 50 minutes. So then they're just no good. The thing is you had brigade running like the balloons up and using observation drones to watch us. So we couldn't just fold the thing up and throw it in our bag. We had to have a person out front waving that damn thing, even when it stopped working. Like it was the dumbest shit ever. And it was very frustrating because like we had those Garmin Fortrexes, and after every mission, we had to send the walk data, as it became known, into brigade. So brigade could ensure we were actively walking for 8 hours every patrol. It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever dealt with.
So you had to walk for a certain amount of time as opposed to a distance or to a destination?
Yes. Yeah. And the Captain Swanson, like I said, one of the best leaders I've ever had, he would say, okay, if we're going to be out this long, let's, aim small, miss small. Let's go into this village. Let's talk to the people. Let's just keep going there. What's the worst that happens, right? Like they see us, they're like, okay, these guys are legit, let's see if we can like build a well or work another project into the conversation, see what happens, right? But dude, there were times where, and you got to understand, around Panzai, there were other smaller villages around that just looked bombed out and abandoned. That those would be something that came down from brigade, like you have to go in there. And it's like, but the intel we received is like literally those places are laced with IEDs because they put all the shit in the dead center of them, and only like the insurgents know how to kind of get in, weave their way through.
You into sort of a kill zone.
Yeah, right. And we're like, that makes no sense, especially if you're not going to give us eyes on it for like a day or two, and then give us the assets to kind of defeat the IED threat. But he'd be like, no, I mean, this would be coming down all the way from the top, from brigade down. Like, no, you have to go walk in these villages. And we're like, oh, God damn it, just it was literally working to time, not standard. The exact opposite of
what we do.
Yeah.
Wow. So when Dominic Latino, your PL, and everybody get wounded, was there a sense that what could come next was going to be bad because you didn't know who you were getting? Or were you kind of the mindset that you'd replaced other guys before? You had a good idea of the battle rhythm and things of that nature. Like, what was the feeling after that PL was sort of taken out of the equation?
So I got pulled, for whatever reason, they pulled a staff sergeant from each platoon and sent us back to the Big Fob Brigade. Yeah. No, not Bagram. It was down. Give me a second. It'll come to me. It was, oh, Jesus. I can't believe I'm forgetting this. It'll come to me. But we all had to go back, and the operations sergeant majors, like, you all have to be retrained on how to use the mine hounds, because our Bravo troop literally had this ridiculous massacre the week prior. Like 10 dudes were hit. They had a couple deaths. Like, it's just, the ID threat was just that prevalent. That was their primary weapon to get us, right? And it's like, so we go into oh man, that name's gonna piss me off, but we get to the Big Fob, right? Where brigade's at. And we meet with the civilians that are servicing the mine hounds, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay, guys, we know this is not a good product, and we know a lot of you guys only got to mess with it, a few weeks before you left. So what are some of the issues? And they're writing them down, and we were telling them we were dumping water on the t-shirts, putting them in the freezer, and then wrapping them around like the battery pack just to get an extra 20 or 30 minutes out of it, right? And he's like, okay, so overheating, the GPR is not fully functioning. Okay, got it, and then you would have thought that with civilian contracted officials and an operations sergeant major that had a fucking Grenada scroll on, or excuse me, a Panama scroll on, that he would be very well versed in. You are not the subject matter expert on this particular item of equipment. Those contractors are. Well, this particular sergeant major didn't feel that way. and essentially told us we were all fucked up. And that's why people were dying, right? Which I got a case of the ass. So my counterpart from second platoon, I went to dinner chow and I saw like 4 vehicles for my platoon. And I'm like, what are you guys doing here? They're like, well, Dom got hit. So did Kerner. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, are we walking wounded? Like, what's the deal? And Dom got peppered really bad. They packed some HME with like shrapnel into a mason jar essentially, and it just shot straight up. But it caught Kerner in the butt cheek and took out like a fist-sized chunk of his butt cheek. And Dom got peppered from like mid shin up to his forehead, so he was just like a bloody mess. Right. And we're just like, well, fuck. And Keith's there, and he's like, hey man, how long's this class? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Let's just leave. Like what's the worst that happens? They don't see me, in the classroom or for retrain. They're just going to bitch. Okay, that's fine. But there's like my PL just went down. Keith is now the PL and I'm running the platoon as a platoon sergeant. Right. Mm-hmm. So that seemed a little more important than having a man who's probably never handled a mine hound tell us that we didn't know how to use this item of equipment. Right. So Keith and I did that for a few weeks, and I think we did pretty well. During that time, Haynes got hit in the neck. But we had a squad leader that was a corporal, but we were still. Is that a
necessity?
Yeah. We lost 2 staff sergeants. One got pulled to squadron to kind of like fill like an LNO NCO job. And I was like, well, why does that come from us? This is ridiculous. And I can't remember what happened to the other. Yeah. But we were making it work. Like I said, was it hard? Absolutely. It really was. But, everybody was still on the same page. We were all still working collectively together. I lucked out, had great AGs in my gun teams because for 3 months, I did the AM and the PM patrol. One team would go out during the day, one team would go out during the evening, but I went out on both of them. And, my AGs were like, dude, you can't do that anymore. Like, you have to be able to sleep, and I'm like, well, fair enough. That's a good point. So, like if I would do like 1 patrol a day and then, do cover down on SOG. So one of the line squad leaders can head out with his people. Like that was just stuff we did. Like it was a mutually supporting kind of like, ecosystem there. It was great.
Had you heard the name Clint Lorance prior to knowing he was coming to your platoon?
Yes. I knew, like I had been in 4th Brigade. I was in 4th Brigade from when it was stood up to when they cased colors. Like I knew everybody there. And, I think we went back to Garaband so we could like take a shower, and shave our face, which is, I don't know if you could tell, I was a twice-a-day shaver. But like, I just got really lazy about that because like white wastewater, it's not that big a deal if we shave every other day or, whatever. But like, so we go to Garaband, I took a shower and I shaved my face and, I was like, fuck it, we'll go get on the computer, and, I was talking to family and, I get a Facebook message from a buddy and he's like, hey, Clint Lorance is coming to you. And I'm like, all right, so what about him? And they're like, well, he's not tabbed, prior enlisted MP, does a really good job in the talk. And I'm like, all right, whatever. But I was sitting with Captain Swanson and he's like, hey man, what do you think about Lieutenant Colthard, who was our Coist PL? And I was like, that would be the dude that I'd want. He knows the people. He's familiar with the area already. And he's right here. We don't have to bring him from brigade down. He's right here. So Captain Swanson and I went and talked to Colonel Howard. And Captain Swanson's like, sir, I know you've got a replacement for Dom Latino lined up, but why not just move Colford over? Right. He's already here, same arguments I just said. He knows the area, he knows the people, whatever. And essentially Colonel Howard told us to shut up and get back in our box and mind our business. And we were just like, all right, that went about as well as we thought it would, but we had to try. And then when we went back. We were told, Lorance would be there within a day or two, and he showed up. I had one interaction with him prior to that when I got new soldiers. I had to have them zero their weapons because they literally came into theater without having the ability to zero their weapons. And they were just they were detainees, or they were on detainee guard for however many months at this point. And I'm like, well, we can't have you firing an unzeroed weapon. So we shot down to the big fob, and Lorance was the guy that opened the range. He introduced himself, seemed like a brand new lieutenant. That's how I felt about him,
Yeah. In retrospect, do you wish you had fought harder for that other lieutenant? Do you wish that you had made a bigger plea to the battalion or squadron commander to listen to you guys?
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm surprised Swanson took me with him because I don't keep my mouth shut. It wasn't one of the finer things I picked. I learned very well. But I opened my mouth quite a bit. I thought it was just a really dumb idea to, again, this was, hey, an LT went down. This is an infantry lieutenant. We got to get him in the nitty gritty. Never mind the fact that we're coming to the last 3 months of this thing. We're at the tail end. We don't need new guys. We don't need that. And that, we, not for that reason, I should say. Like, we don't need a brand new lieutenant coming in who's shown that, yeah, would it be cool for him to walk out here and get a CIB? Sure, absolutely, right? But this is not the place to break in the new lieutenant. Like, that's honestly how I felt about it. This is not the place. If you want to do that, go send him somewhere else within the brigade, right? But don't send him here. And I said as much. Captain Swanson then broke it down into like officer ease, so Colonel Howard wasn't quite so pissed about me opening my mouth. But again, Howard told us essentially to go fuck ourselves, and that this was a decision that was above Colonel Swanson's pay grade, and that he needed to just toe the line. And we walked out of that meeting just like, well, all right. I mean, you can't really argue with the squadron commander when, he's of a mind, and that wasn't, he wasn't going to budge on it.
I shake my head. One, because I just don't operate in that world. Never have, never will. I'll always take the input from the people who are at the ground level and ask them for their assessment. If I can't trust those people to make those decisions, then I shouldn't have put them there in the first place. It's just frustrating because it's that sort of logic that it's above his pay grade. No, it's exactly within his pay grade. He's the commander. He's the troop commander. It is exactly his decision to provide me with a recommendation, the squadron/battalion commander, on what he thinks is best for his unit, because he ultimately deals with those people on a daily basis a lot more than I do.
And again, this was not the space to be breaking in a lieutenant like that. This was not it. Like, we had lost Nick Olivas from our sister platoon. We were taking it. We took 473. We took a lot of casualties for an element of our size. And what I've always appreciated about that is we always just came back and said, fuck it. Like, we still have a mission to do. And like you referred to earlier, like, you're kind of in that environment, you're going to do that, right? Like, it comes natural. And I think we were honestly doing it out of spite at that point, because we felt like we were the smallest maneuver element within the brigade, and we got the largest slice of territory to cover, which made no sense. Maybe Colonel McGuinness, the brigade commander, saw something in us, or whatever the case was. But you really don't give your smallest maneuver element the biggest slice, because when we start, going through that attrition process of losing, soldiers, like, we don't have a backfill. We don't have a ready backfill.
Losses become more vital. Like, and I'm not minimizing any particular loss because everybody's vital, but when the pickings are slim, it makes it a lot more difficult to ask more of less.
Yeah.
When you have a larger unit, it's easier to backfill. And there are more people sort of with a wider swath of experience because you have a bigger pool to choose from.
Yeah.
That's not the case when you're in a smaller unit.
Yeah. And, so like when we heard we were getting Lorance, we were like, you know what? I sat down with Keith, because he asked like how the meeting with Howard go, and I was like, how do you think it went, man? Like, like we knew this wasn't going to go well. you know, and so he's like, all right, man, we're gonna do whatever we can to kind of bring him in. Like that's what we're supposed to do. And I'm like, dude, don't worry about that. Like, we're just a bunch, like we literally were just guys that like hung out with each other. You know what I mean? Like this wasn't going to be a difficult thing. We let everybody in, and we had some fucking weirdos in that platoon, and so the first day, like he does like a sit down individually with everybody in the platoon. Like, what do you see for your Army career? What do you expect from this deployment? Really benign.
I'll worry about the rest of it later.
Yeah, it was like, okay, dude, I just want to retire. That's all. And like, what do I want from this deployment? I want to go home and like drink beer and eat real food again. That would be a blast, but he sat down with everybody and asked them these questions, and Swanson kind of gives him the lay of the land, but there was a big push the next day, so he stayed back because he was going to move out with second platoon, right? And that's a thing. Like Lorance's defense is like, well, he didn't left seat right seat him. No, but he literally had the acting platoon sergeant and the acting PL that had been doing this for almost a month, right? Like we were there. We can do that for Captain Swanson, So, we got him down there, day 2, or at the end of day 1, we plan our first patrol. Like, hey, we're going to push out early in the morning. We're going to go to, like I told you, one of those bombed out villages to the north of us. And we're just like, fuck, okay, let's do this. Right. And I let the guys know. And, for my weapons squad, you had your ready bags ready and lined up at the front of the tent, ready to go. All you were going to throw in there was the water that you know what I mean? Like everything was prepped, that way I could get the guys the most sleep as I could. Then we woke up, and I know I'll probably catch some shit for this, but everybody had to pound 2 bottles of water during mission brief. I checked their socks, make sure everybody had clean socks on at least. And then, we were ready to roll. Right. And we, like I said, I had been used to working, kind of without adult supervision, right? Like that. I'm a weapons squad leader. I'm the second senior enlisted guy in the fucking platoon at this point, right? And I found this nice little hill where I had good observation. And more importantly for me at the time, it was shaded. Like it was right under a tree, right? And since we were going to be out there for, 6-7 hours, I would like to have at least a little shade, right? But it gave me good observation and fields of fire from where the line squad needed to go. So I got with Lieutenant Lorance. I'm like, hey, we're dipping out. We're going over to this hill. And he's like, no, you're not. And I was like, wait a minute, dude. We're not. He's like, no, you're going to move up to the village. And I'm like, so I can't see you and provide cover. And he's like, that's not your job. And I was like, that is precisely my job. Like, that's what weapons squad does. Right. And like, I'm not even kidding you, man. Like I'm nose to nose with this dude at this point. And my AG, Anthony Reynoso, who's like 5'4", 5'5", maybe, he gets in between us and goes, Mike, now is not the time or the place. And I was like, Reynoso, I'm going to fucking kill you when we get back. And Reynoso just I apologized to him as soon as we got back, because it was totally unprofessional of me to do that, and Reynoso's just looking at me like, dude, I've heard this before. Just shut up. Like you can't hit the PL on patrol. You cannot do that. Right. And I'm like, all right, cool. So he did. He moved us.
You just can't do it while on patrol.
Yeah. But he moved us. He moved us within like 150 meters of this village where we couldn't see inside. Like we could not see inside. And, I'm listening on the radio. I got security up, and I'm just like, you know what? This is how it is, guys. We're out. There's 4 of us out here by ourselves. I mean, this is a great, target of opportunity here, and Shiloh's just like, well, if we're going to go, I'm unloading everything in the off chance that we do survive and I have to carry all these rounds back. And I'm like, you know what? Fair enough, man. All right, just don't melt the barrel, just, and, I hear my buddy Murray, he was the second squad leader. He's on the horn. He's like, hey, we're coming out. And I was like, well, it's about time. And, you know, it was one of those big walled off little culottes with the 2 swinging doors that had the catch at the bottom. And, you know, they would put the chain where the handles, you know, right. So they come out bebopping out of that. And, you know, I'm just kind of watching them. And you could see the door catch at the bottom. It looks like a door catch at the bottom. And he calls it up as an IED and then tells the ANA guy to shoot it with an RPG. Right?
Lorance did this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And I'm like, oh, fuck. This is not good. Right. This is very bad. That's a false report. You know, like I can see it through an ACOG, like your very bland ACOG that we had while in the, you know, Army, that was a door catch. That's all it was. Right. And ANA did what he was told, you know? So we walk back, you know, we get hit right at the gate. And I'm telling you, man, the only reason I'm throwing this in here because it's funny. Like I said, Reynoso and Carson were my 2 AGs. They were the only 2 qualified to shoot the Gustav. But like I said, Reynoso is super short. So he puts the round in, lays it for direct impact, or the delayed impact, you know, the 5-second cook. And he skips this thing. Like, I don't know how it hit where he wanted it to go, but he skipped it. And it just ballistics, and maybe it was the work of God or whatever the fuck. But he manages to hit the guys that are shooting at us, right? And I'm looking at Reynoso. I'm like, you literally skipped it like a rock. He's like, I don't know, man. I'm just that good. I'm like, okay, man.
Good, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But we get back inside after all that, you know. And I went to Keith, and I'm like, dude, there was no IED. He called up a false report, right? And Keith's like, are you kidding? And I'm like, no. And Chris is like, you know, Murray, you know, is sitting there looking at Keith, and he's just trying to tell him about the patrol, like about how big of a shit show it was, right? And, you know, Keith's like, hey, listen, I need you both to shut up. He just got here. You know, he's a new PL. We have to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I love Keith. Like, I respect the shit out of that guy. And I'm like, all right, man. And I was like, this is on you, though. You know, this isn't on, you know, I brought forward my concern early, right? So, you know, that night, you know, we get back, you know, we're sitting there playing cards. You know, we asked the LT to like just come play spades, and he's like, no, I'm too busy to do that. Like, the guy only slept like 2.5, 3 hours a night, which we're like, dude, you can't live like that. You know, like you can't. That's not existence. I never saw him eat the entire 3 days he was with us. And so that night he calls us in and he gives us this brief. Hey, we're going to go into Panzai. We are going to set up, we were going to talk to everybody and tell them to come to the Shura. That's going to happen this coming Friday. And, you know, we went through the basics of it. You know, I got with Keith and I'm like, hey, if you need me to observe things, there's only like one building in the village that's got a roof that we can get on top of. So I'll grab a second mine hound. We'll clear our own path through the village. We'll get on the roof and I can observe. And he's like, yeah, you know, and Lorance was like, fine, you know, just right. So that night though, we get the weapons clean, you know, we do our job. And I sat down, we got our ready bags laid out. And I told the guys, I was like, listen, if it doesn't come from me or if it doesn't come from Keith, just don't do it. You know? And they kind of looked at me and were like, well, what about the PL? I was like, don't worry about the PL. I was like, you listen to Keith, you listen to me, and that's it. That's the long and short of it. And then I took my AGs outside, you know, with a couple of the other team leaders that I had worked with, and I told them why. You know, and I also made sure I put this out in no uncertain terms. Like, that was just for my weapons squad. Like, I can't tell you guys the rest, but I wanted you to hear. He's calling up false reports. He's having ANA fire RPGs at door catches and all this shit, you know? And so all of us are just like, Jesus Christ. Right. So we wake up the next morning and at like probably 4:30. And, you know, again, same routine, force hydrate, go over the mission. Right. And then Lorance comes out of the talk, you know, And it's like, hey, the ROE's changed. And I was like, I didn't see anything about ROE changing, right? And then, he's like, well, it came down from the Candat command. And so we went over to the medic that we had with our Afghan squad, who probably speaks better English than you or I. I'm not even kidding. And he's like, we haven't talked to our Candat commander in like a month. And I was like, oh. So,
Oh, Captain Swanson at all?
I was on the horn with Swanson almost the entire day. Right. But, Lorance is like, here's the ROE. And again, I told the guys, unless you hear it from me, just don't. Right. Like, just don't. Because I was going to have one gun team on the ground and my other gun team was going to be in a gun truck, kind of masking our movement to give us a little extra ass out there. And he starts going over the order of the movement and he puts me in the ass end of the formation. I'm like, that's not where you put a weapons squad. We go in the dead center, right? We provide you the most firepower, but you have to protect us on our way there. Like, that's how this works. I had never been put in the ass end of a formation before, so like we're in the ass end and we're moving slow, and you see this big plume of dust and we knew it was a motorcycle. Like, it's Afghanistan. This is what they ride. And the paths are only like, what, 1.5 feet across. So you're not bringing a car down there. Right. And that's when I hear on the radio, Lorance telling the truck to fire. And I immediately, got on the horn. I'm like, do not, don't listen to that order. Don't listen to that order. And I just start taking off towards his position in the formation. And that's when I heard the 240 go off. And I'm like, son of a bitch. Like, I don't know. I can't see anything because, like I said, I'm in the ass end of the formation. And I told Keith, I was like, listen, we can do one of two things. We RTB or we move ahead, but we can't just sit here like out in the open. And he's like, all right, get up on the roof. So we cleared our path and we got up on the roof. Right. And I have my radio on. I carried an ASIP because I kept breaking all like the Thales stuff they gave me, but like I changed over to troop and I'm like, hey, I think something bad happened. I can't confirm, stand by. Right. And that's when my engagement happened where I had two guys pop up and we engaged both of them. Right. But I only gave authorization to fire after troop came back to me and said, hey, we have Wolfhound chatter saying that they see you guys. Do they have a radio? Absolutely, they have a radio. That is engagement criteria. Go ahead and fire. So I gave them the, I told my boys, hey, engage, and which they did, right? So Keith came walking down the little path. I was like, what the fuck are you guys shooting at? And I was like, are you not monitoring troop? And he's like, no. And I was like, well, I cleared it through troop. There was Wolfhound chatter. These guys are watching us. And he's like, okay. He's like, but hey, man, I think 2 civilians got killed. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the village elder. One of them was a village elder. He's like, I haven't really been able to get eyes on because everybody's like, all the locals, all the villagers are obviously very upset and pissed off, and Lorance is like gesturing with his rifle and like telling the interpreter to tell the mothers that if they don't get their kids out of here, that he was going to, do physical harm to them or he was going to shoot them. Like all this shit's happening and being relayed to me through the radio. And I looked at Keith and I was like, dude, what are we doing? And he's like, pack your fucking ready bag, get off the roof and get ready to move. And I was like, all right. So that's exactly what we did. And getting back, to the cop, we got hit again. Right. And we get back there, man. And I probably smoked like 10 cigarettes and used a lighter once, man. Like I was just like, oh my God, like what is happening? Right.
Let me just ask you a question here before we go too far down the rest of what goes on. What about that thing? I don't want to phrase it that way because it sounds stupid. I mean, there's a certain sentiment of, hey, the Afghans have taken out enough of our dudes. if a couple of them go away, even if they're civilians, what's the big deal, right? Like, there's a lot of soldiers who would have that mentality. Hey, it's better than an American. Like, you could sort of rationalize anything away in combat to a certain extent that you want to within reason. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of this that conveniently could have been swept under the rug, right or wrong, and left it to the fog of war. And I'm playing devil's advocate here. But you seem to have the instinct that immediately you knew something was wrong. Was it the previous day's incident that had sort of set up the antenna, or was this just as egregious as it sounds to the point where there was no objectifying that anything about this could be rationalized?
I mean, Haynes got hit in that village, right? Mm-hmm. He got hit, but up to that point, we hadn't taken a lot of fire or hardly any at all when we were inside, right? The people had started kind of coming around to, I don't want to say our line of thinking, but they were seeing that we were there and doing our best, and that we were genuinely we're trying to help, right? And then you couple that with the day prior, for me anyway, where I didn't trust his judgment, mm-hmm. And I mean, most of our engagements took place, 100, 150 meters away from the gate. Like, this guy wasn't that far out, the dust cloud was hitting us in the face as they got closer. And these people stopped. Like, that was on the radio that they had stopped moving. They had complied with the Afghan army's order to stop. There was no barreling at us. The only person that thinks that bike was on the move still when they were shot is Clint Lorance.
Yeah. I mean, I'm picking up from you that, the impact of this hits you immediately.
Yeah. I mean, dude, like you said, there's a lot of rationalizing in it, but like I said, I have lucked out and served with such great units, man. Like, we didn't have issues like this, mm-hmm. right? Like, for me, we did it the right way. And that's why I told the guys, this is how we do it. We do it the right way. We don't shoot civilians. There is for me, I hate the term collateral fucking damage, especially when we're talking about small arms, right? I hate the idea of it to begin with, but when you're dropping, missiles from, drones and fixed wing and artillery pieces, I get that. But like, if it's around, I'm firing, no. Like, I don't buy that collateral damage bullshit, especially when you are in that area where the only people around are either the locals, and they're not straying too far from the village because they get hassled by Taliban when they go further out, or it's the people shooting us and we can see them. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, there's a clear line from that.
Yeah. So when I hear, because I've been dealing with this for, almost 10 years now, people like to use that collateral damage. Dude, fuck you and your collateral damage. These are people, and I get it. You want the American forces to be safe. That's fine. I get that. I understand the sentiment, but the job is dangerous to begin with. That doesn't give an American service member any right to just go shooting at another person who has every right to live as we do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the collateral damage thing makes sense. I always, in my first deployment, 05 to 06, the idea of warning shots was allowed. And I told my guys, I don't believe in that. A weapon is meant to put a round on target. If it's good enough to fire, then it better be a target. There's no reason that there should be a warning shot, right? I mean, if you're at the point where you're ready to pull the trigger, you should have positively identified a target that is worthy of putting a round on. No. There's no reason to just aimlessly fire and hope for the best to try to scare somebody. So I sort of get where you're coming from with the collateral damage from small arms making sense. All right, so the magnitude of this whole thing hits you. You're talking about it with Keith there as the platoon sergeant. What does the conversation continue? How does it go on?
Well, dude, I smoked my last cigarette, went inside to talk, and Lorance is literally at the table, just like happy as can be. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck are you smiling at? Like, what? It's like, this isn't good, man. And the thing is, before we pushed off, one of my machine gunners was a guy named Shiloh, and he was one of the 13 Bravos I was telling you I got. Like, he was like, dude, I want to reclass and go infantry. This is what I want to do. but he was a big boy, right? And his AG had worked with him. He cut all this weight, and we were going to go up to Garaband and height and weigh him to get his reclass package started. So I told Lorance right there, I was like, I'm going up to troop, and Captain Swanson is going to fucking hear about this, right? And he's just like, well, how do we spin this? Like, how do we fix this? And I'm like, dude, there's no fucking fixing it. And then Dan Williams, who was one of the staff sergeants, he was tracking everything through the base defense kind of operations thing. Like, they put up a bunch of cameras and shit. Mm-hmm. You know, he was like, sir, that wasn't a justified kill, you know? And, you know, I let Lorance know. I was like, dude, this is your ass, and I don't feel bad about it. You know, you were in the wrong. You know, so I got Shiloh together. I filled up 2 trucks, and we went back to Garaband. And Skelton, who and you know, before he joined the military, was like a sheriff's deputy. Like he was like our Coist guy. He took everything that he pulled off the 2 dead bodies, and gave it to Captain Swanson before I could talk to him. You know, like Skelton did the right thing. Because Lorance called up and said that he couldn't search the bodies because they were pulled away. Which, again, this is another fucking fabrication on his part, you know? Mm-hmm. So Captain Swanson came outside, and dude, like, he comes outside and is like, yo, Mike, did this really happen? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you know, this is going to be bad. And I was like, well aware. So he, First Sergeant Franco, came to me, and he's like, everybody on that patrol, you get their asses up here right now, at this, like right now. So I got on the horn, I called Keith up, he starts getting everybody ready. We're sending 2 trucks to bring, you know, everybody out on the patrol back and forth. And we got it. Was
Lorance included in that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. And the thing is Pat, you know, Swanson went up to Lorance, essentially was like, hey, sit down here in this tent, you know, away from us. And he's like, I got to call this up. This has got to go higher. So Swanson and Chuck Tinsley, who was the XO, printed off all these sworn statements and bought extra paper. And he's like, guys, I need you to write sworn statements. And we did. You know, mine was like 7 or 8 pages long, give or take. And literally the next day, Major Washington was appointed the 15-6 investigating officer. You know, that's when, you know, that's when shit got real bad for not just Lorance, but for me and my gun team, because they took our weapons. They sent us to Squadron HQ, where we were interviewed by a reserve CID unit from California, and they were going to charge us with murder because apparently our engagement violated the rules of engagement, because radios were no longer engagement criteria. But what they
engagement on the roof you're referring to, not the side.
Yeah, the engagement on the roof.
You were being charged with a completely separate crime.
Yes. But what they never sent to us was that, yes, the rules of engagement changed, but they didn't notify us.
Yeah. Okay. There's one small, minute detail.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They said that they put memorandums out. I lived in this shitty little strong point where literally the only way for months we could only communicate through BFT text messages. Like, okay, you know, sorry, I didn't check my global.
Yeah, my Blue Force tracker never worked, so I didn't even bother communicating.
Yeah,
messages, but neither here nor there.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Like this is what they tried to tell us, and I got this real dickhead, you know, because you don't know their names. But like the first interview, like at the beginning, I noticed his rifle like kind of leaned up against the tent, and he had a CCO mounted backwards. And I was like,
that'd be a good feeling.
Yeah, I was like, bro. I was like, who are you going to shoot with that?
Before we start the interview, can I just ask you a question? How does that work?
You know, and I'm just
you're
like,
here to questions, but let me just get one out of the way real quick.
I got to dip in, and he's like, well, you know, technically this is a government building. We shouldn't be using tobacco. And I just kind of looked at him. And he like slides this charge sheet with my name and murder on it. And I'm like, what the fuck? And he starts, I was like, dude, I got nothing to hide. I didn't do anything wrong. All right. And, he's asking yes or no questions. And then he starts wanting more in-depth stuff. And he makes this kind of offhand threat, like, you help us out so, your soldiers don't get in trouble as well. And I'm like, no, bullshit. I was like, I'll change my statement right now and say I pulled the trigger. I was like, you're not going after them. Right. And he's like, are you saying you're going to perjure yourself? I'm like, dude, you're trying to hit me up with murder. What's lying? Who gives a shit? I was like, I was like, I don't care. I was like, but you're not going after them, And he's like, well, we can. I'm like, no, you won't. I was like, I just told you what I'll do, like, and he got really pissy. And then I was like, you know what? I want an attorney. And then I come to find out, because it's all in the trial transcripts, the fucking squadron sergeant major and the squadron commander said we were all being assholes because we wanted legal representation when we're being questioned by CID agents. Right?
I just, the leadership makes stuff like that so much worse. Support the process, all of it from start to finish. That's why it's the process. There's no reason to try and push it one way or another. So when you had made the decision that you were going to go to troop, did anybody try to talk you out of it? Was there any conversation, whether it was with, Sardinairs or anybody else, or you just made this decision unilaterally on your own to go, I'm done with this and I'm reporting it right now?
Well, Keith, at that point, he couldn't fight back against that. Like, he saw it with his own two eyes that this guy is calling up false reports. He's lying to command. And then you have him shooting, giving the order to shoot 2 fucking civilians, again, one of which was the fucking village elder, right? Like, this is bad. This isn't just like kind of bad. This is bad, So, Dan Williams immediately agreed with me. Murray said, yeah, Rule was our other squad leader. He was the corporal, and he was like, yeah, dude, you have to go.
What about the kid who pulled the trigger on the 240?
Shiloh?
Yeah.
Dude, when I talked to him, he was he was a mess. He's like, dude, Sergeant, like, I just heard a bunch of yelling over the radio. And then the last thing I heard was, the LT telling me to shoot. And I was like, dude, like, that's not on you, like, that you should not have been put in that position, because after he fired the first shots, a kid came up and Lorance was telling him to shoot the kid. And Shiloh was like, I'm not doing that, sir.
It's beyond comprehension. Have you spoken to Shiloh at all? Do you still keep in contact with him?
He's one of the guys that kind of fell off once he got out of the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little longer after Twist died. So yeah, a little more than a year. But he's got a job. He's doing well. He's just like, dude, I don't want to be associated with this shit. He's like, I don't tell anybody I was ever in. He's like, I live my life, and I respect that.
More on that later. Lot to unpack there. But all right, so you're being questioned for murder. Is there a part of you that's sitting there jumping up and down going, dude, we're not here to talk about me. I'm here because I wanted to talk about what I saw the other guy do.
Yeah. That's what I brought up. And then I was told that's a whole other investigation. So I was like, all right, well, when can I go interview for that one? And they were just like, well, you better take care of yourself first. And I was like, all right, dude, cool. I finally got my attorney. I didn't even get to meet the woman. I had to contact her through Global. And she was representing me and the 3 others that were on my gun team, because when I left the initial interview, after telling them I want representation, I went right to them and they're like, all of you request representation.
Did somebody tattle on you? Did Lorance tell back on you guys about what happened on the roof?
I have a feeling he did. I can't confirm anything. It's all just my thought process, and maybe I'm not an unbiased person to ask here,
right?
But I think he probably did.
Let's say it this way: in your opinion, do you think he told on you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I really think he did to draw heat off himself, because I don't think I know for a fact it didn't register what he did when it first happened. Like when we went back to Garaband, right? He just thought it's, like you said, we'll justify this and sweep it on the rug, and it's not going to be a big deal, right? No, because when all those sworn statements came out, right, they all essentially said the same damn thing, covering his, honestly, inability to do his job and all the crimes he committed, right? Because it wasn't just giving an illegal order, it was changing the ROE, which, yes, I know he gets exonerated on, but when I think 8 of us said that we heard it right from his mouth, the only thing that got him off on that charge was Keith saying he doesn't recall hearing it, right? But he filed multiple false reports. He just, again, he shouldn't have fucking been there. I wish Colonel Howard would have listened, but that's neither here nor there. But
it is here or there. But again, there's nothing you can really do about it. Which is why I harped on it a moment ago when we discussed it, because you don't hear his name ever brought up in this whole thing. You'll never hear Colonel Howard's name tied to any of this, when in reality, he could have prevented it all.
Yeah.
If he had listened to it, and that's, as a senior officer, that's my frustration with this whole thing, is that sometimes it's shut your mouth and move out, because I'm the boss, which may be fine and okay in certain scenarios, but in other ones, there are second and third order effects to that shut the hell up and move out kind of deal that we don't ever hold that person accountable for. And so,
this is the shitty part, man. I'm not even kidding you. Like probably 4 years after it happened, like, this is after, I got out of the hospital and like I was getting my life in order, but like my career is essentially done, like he hits a bunch of us up on Facebook. Like he had retired at this point because, he's not getting promoted again. That came from his unit, his career is done.
Yep.
And he was like, he sends this like heartfelt apology. And I'm like, dude, guess what? You're out of the Army. Get fucked. Like you could have helped us. You could have protected us.
Yep.
Just by being an advocate, right? Just by advocating for us, you could have helped us, and you didn't. I was like, you and fucking Gustafson sat back and watched it happen, and then threw Keith and I under the bus.
Yeah, I mean I don't even know how to. I'm just trying to be empathetic to you in this spot, but it is frustrating beyond all belief when stuff like this happens. It's only 1 or 2 people who ever really end up taking the fall for it, and many of those in the chain of command don't. And really, the chain of command works both ways. It's up and down, and when something happens, everybody along that chain should bear some responsibility for it and some accountability for it. And the fact that we sort of draw the line somewhere with some plausible deniability, well, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. I put him in charge, but what else am I supposed to do? Like, I've even uttered those words at times. Like, what am I going to do? Like, well, I'm the freaking boss. So yeah, it falls on my plate. There's no, you have to accept that you're responsible for everything that happens and fails to happen. And so, I get it, man. I mean, I don't want to underscore that, that's why I asked before about it, that whole conversation, because again, as somebody who sits in those positions and can make those decisions and give you the shut the hell up and move out, we can't abdicate the responsibility for those decisions.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, whether you're a team leader with only 3 people under you, or you're a fucking, squadron commander, like you're still responsible for like you said, what happens and what doesn't happen when it comes to your subordinates. It's your bag, man. You got to carry it, and, and that sucked because like, dude, they isolated all of us after that. Like we had another like 2 months left in theater at this point. I got stuck in the BDOC. Still wasn't allowed to carry a weapon. It took them like 3 weeks for them to get me a pistol, which, trust me, your asshole hasn't puckered till you've been in a war zone with literally 0 means to defend yourself if things go sideways.
Rocks in my canteen cup.
Yeah. And it sucked because like in the BDOC, they depend on these balloons. They were never up. So I literally just sat for 12 hours a day staring at a blank screen. And then I would go to the gym and I would go to sleep and I rest and repeat for 2 months. And the kicker of all this, the fucking kicker, is we finally start redeploying. I get sent to Kandahar. I get put in a tent with Keith and a couple of my other buddies, so I'm feeling okay, right? I get told I'm going to be put on the last aircraft back, and guess who's going to be on that aircraft with me?
Clint Lorance.
Yep. And I fucking I went full fucking toddler and was like, there's no fucking way I'm getting on that aircraft with him. You can just leave me right here. I will just stay in Kandahar. Like I'm not getting on a plane with that guy.
Did you end up getting on a plane with him?
No. Believe it or not, Jeffrey Howard made sure I got swapped to one flight later. One flight earlier. So that was nice.
Yeah. Let's put the Lorance stuff aside for a second. Your particular case, how does it end up sort of adjudicating, and what happens? I mean, obviously you never were charged with murder and you never went to Leavenworth. So what happens in that particular instance?
Well, for 2 months after we got back, like I got shoved in a training room, right? Not even really allowed to do the training job because I'm under investigation. I'm angry because this thing happened. I'm angry that I got thrown on the bus. And even more so, I'm angry because I finally got orders to go to Vicenza and they got canceled because I was under investigation, right? So like I'm like 10 shades of fucking butthurt at this point. And I keep asking the new commander, because I'm not kidding you, Captain Swanson was gone within 3 or 4 weeks when we got back.
And oh, by the way, nothing happened to him in any of this, correct?
No. Captain Swanson fought his ass off for us, though. He was the only man that was actively shielding guys like me and Keith and the other guys on my gun team, and essentially the entire platoon. He was the only one that stood up and did anything. And the thing is like he never publicized that, right? Like he didn't do that. And he and I are still very good friends. I had to tell the guys that, because they were like, what about fucking Swanson? I'm like, dude, you guys didn't see what he did for us or what he tried to do for us. Because he was going to do it quietly. It's not his personality to be out and flashy about things.
Of something he did, of how he went to bat for you guys?
He fought, because Keith and I ended up getting Gomars, essentially for failing to stop Lorance and what he did, and for not staying in accordance of the rules of engagement for the engagement I was on the roof, right? Swanson fought hard he's just like, no, that's ridiculous. You can't blame the 2 senior NCOs for failing to stop a lieutenant who made these conscious decisions to do these bad things.
Yeah. That's collateral damage, right? Like that's stupid. That's punishing people for the sake of punishing people to make it sort of fair and make it sort of balanced. So we're not putting all the blame on one person, which is asinine. It's okay to put the blame on one person when it's one person's fault.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing, what it was weird is like within the span of that first 2 months back, man, Captain Swanson gets moved out, right? Our squadron command team swaps out and the brigade command team swaps out. Oh. So nobody there, that is like the colonel that signed my Gomar, has no idea who the fuck I am. One of the first things he affixes his signature to as a brigade commander are Gomars for 2 NCOs who he's never even met. He's never even interacted with. And it was just like, he had us there at attention and he puts us at parade rest and he's like, guys, I've only heard about this entire situation like through second and third hand sources. I'm sorry, but here's your general officer memorandum of reprimand. And of course it happens right around the time they eliminate the restricted file for NCOs. So he and I are kind of fucked, right?
They were permanently filed. It wasn't a temporary file.
No, it was permanently filed. So I'm just like, okay. And the command sergeant major pulls me in his office and was like, hey man, this sucks. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to just say whatever you want. Go ahead. And I did. I went off for like 4 minutes and 53 seconds. And then I saw him just, tapping his watch, and I went back to parade west and shut my mouth. And he's like, hey man, if you just work hard, you can get past this. And you could tell on his face that he's saying that because he has to. He
was full of shit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to get over Gomar. So like I'm isolated from everybody still. We're waiting for this trial to start. And I couldn't handle the shit anymore. Like I was not mentally prepared to deal with the fact that I have 2 dead civilians at the time I was like, I failed to stop that happening. Right. And then on top of that, it's like I have no support structure anymore because I'm not even allowed to speak to the other people involved because we're under gag order. Right. Like, so like I'm just flapping in left field. And, I pulled off of my truck off the side of the road on post and put a gun in my mouth. And, this kid, PFC MP, just taps on the window, and I'm just like, what? I turn and there's a gun in my mouth, and that kid saved my life, and he stayed with me in the hospital afterwards until the next morning when his shift ended. But that was my breaking point, man. Like that was it. And I was, like I said, I was in the hospital for about a week, and the mental health doc, she came up, she was Lieutenant Colonel. And, she's like, hey, we're going to sit down and talk. And I was like, fine, we'll fucking talk. I didn't know what to do anymore, man,
Mm-hmm.
And, she was like, did you really try and kill yourself? And I was like, listen, I told her everything. And she was like, Jesus Christ, you're not messing around. And I said, no. I was like, if you put a 30-pound bag of gummy bears in front of me and said, if you eat all 30 pounds, like you'll be okay. I was like, I'm doing it. Like, I was like, I'm willing to do anything at this point. I was like, I can't feel this way anymore, And
I'm sorry to cut you off. Was it the sort of fear or the feeling that you had failed? Was it the innocent lives that were lost? Was it your personal case? I mean, or was it all these things that were just compounding you to this point where you couldn't take it anymore?
Well, I mean, I'd say it was all those, and then me not properly dealing with combat trauma from the first and second deployments.
Yeah.
I ignored it. I just kind of pushed it away and fuck it. I'll get to it. Like I said, I got focused in on training, and it all just snowballed on me. And I didn't know, I didn't have the tools to accurately fight that. But, she hooked me up with this great doc, and, who literally was like, he started Vietnam as like a PV2 and retired in the early 80s as a brigade commander. Like he knew exactly, I guess, the kind of tough love I needed. And he gave it to me. There were days where he would sit me down and he would just be like, hey man, are you working through your, are you using, your grief coping skills and all these other things that he's telling me to do? And I'm just like, nah. And he's like, dude, stop being a fucking bitch. Like he's like, stop it. He's like, I'm telling you how to start chipping away at this. He's like, this took years to add up. It's going to take years to take away.
Yeah.
And he's like, it takes every step to do that, and I was just like, oh, damn, you old son of a bitch. Like, you're really getting on me. Like, but that's what I needed, And
I'm in the hospital. Did you have to testify or anything in the trial? Or
no? What I ended up doing was I did recorded and written testimony because I called his attorney a greaseball. So I was considered a biased witness. So I gave like background, my written and recorded testimony was considered background.
Do you kind of wish you hadn't called his attorney a greaseball at this point?
No, because that first attorney was a greaseball and that second one's even fucking worse. I mean, it was probably for the best because I was angry and in a bad headspace. And I don't think I would have dealt with it well. Like I just honestly, I don't see how putting me on the stand would have been
like in the same room with him would have went well.
Yeah. So, I think that was probably for the best, because like it, the doc was right. This has taken years to kind of work my way back from, and I'm in a good enough spot now where I can talk about it in a mature manner, like an adult. Fucking when it first happened though, man, I would hear his name and just go into rages, like it triggered this visceral reaction in me every time I heard Clint Lorance. And a lot of it was because like, I'm still in the same unit, like 473 reflagged to second back 501st shortly after we got home and got switched to 1st Brigade because, 4th Brigade was disbanded. Well, I'm dealing with, people on the battalion staff that are like, Lorance did nothing wrong, like right in front of me, not realizing that I'm one of the people that, stood up and spoke out against them. And it just got really, really hard towards the end of my career to deal with. But full disclosure, like the night I tried to kill myself, I got charged with a DUI as well. So I applied that kid for saving me and also doing his job. But that was the straw. That was it. It took a couple years, like doing the process, but it was for the best. Physically, I couldn't do that job anymore. I've had a lot of like back and knee problems, dude. You know how it is. Like I was airborne for 12 years.
Yeah, a lot of jump.
Yeah,
that's sounding too, by the way.
Yeah, and honestly, it wasn't fun. I wasn't enjoying myself anymore. For me, like I had the best job in the world. I got to wake up every morning. I worked out. I hung out with my friends, and I got to shoot guns all day. Like that's great. And on top of that, I was at the point in my career where, like sergeant majors would listen to what I had to say, and, battalion commanders, like it was a nice little kind of like halfway point between me being that snot-nosed 17-year-old kid and that, more seasoned soldier, but like, it wasn't fun anymore, and that's when like the threats started coming in, especially after the trial ended. I had people like hit me up on Facebook saying they were going to kill my wife and kids. I had other service members, in the same division that were sitting there like, yo, we're going to come and get you. Like, it was just fucking ridiculous, Were you
able to sort of ignore that stuff, or did it actually sort of rattle you a little bit?
It did a little bit, because when you're not used to it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not judging any stretch.
You know what I mean?
Some people can just ignore the threats until, it shows up on their front door. Other people take all that stuff seriously, which is fine.
Yeah. But like, if it would have been me, like, hey, you're just going to come and get me. All right, whatever, dude. Good luck. I like my chances. I'm scrappy. But like when you go bring in my kids and my family and stuff.
That's the line, right?
Yeah. So as, we get on, me and a couple of the guys, we did the Stars documentary Leavenworth. They did big promos for this fucking thing, right? Like I got to go to New York City and go to the Tribeca TV Festival to like support it, which bad situation, but that was pretty rad. The food in New York's amazing.
As a native New Yorker, we kind of do food right.
Oh, dude, I did food tourism for the 3-4 days I was there. That's all I did, But I had people like calling my house all the time. And like I printed all that shit off. I recorded everything and I took it to the county sheriff. And all the sheriff said was, listen, just don't shoot pizza guys coming up your driveway. That's all I ask. And he's like, if it's somebody threatening you, that we've come to find out was one of these people that did it, you're within your rights. And I was like, okay, thank you. At least I just wanted you to be aware that there are people that are very upset with me.
Let's go back for a second, because, when he gets convicted, and did you talk with other guys in the unit about their testimony about the trial after the fact, or you weren't in a good space at all to be able to do it, so you just kind of stayed away from it?
I talked to them clandestinely, because again, we were still under gag. Like they pulled, they went back to the traditional RISTA formation. So Alpha and Bravo were all your Cav scouts, and Charlie was your infantry guys. And like I said, once we found out that 4th Brigade was going away, even then you have to move all the 19 Deltas out to other Cav squadrons, since we're not going to be one. We're going to be an infantry battalion. So, we kind of got spread out to hell and gone. But, we would meet out in town and talk about it, just to have, the only people we could safely vent about this was the people that we, went through it. And those were the only people that, when I heard his name, I didn't get mad around, because we're all dealing with the same shit.
I mean, were you obviously relieved when he was convicted, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I wish they would have picked up that book and beat him with it. But when I heard he was getting 19 years, I was like, you know what? That is better than nothing. And I was okay with that. Right. Like that was like a big step on me coming to peace, coming to terms with this entire thing. Like I wasn't even pissed off when General Clark reduced it by a year, like I wasn't. He's still doing time. He did wrong and he's doing time. Right. And then, I can say I was at peace for a little while, and then I watched the fucking documentary. And I don't want to say it like fired me up, but the fact that he thinks that he's to this day he did nothing wrong, like that bothers me. Like what type of person are you, um, to think you did nothing wrong when like literally there's those were a father and an uncle, and like they had families, um, and I think that's fucked up.
Well, I mean, even at the point where you can get that low and it still doesn't hit you, that you're there for a reason, right? You're making little rocks out of a big rock for the next 19 years, and still at that point, humility hasn't hit you, which is sort of mind-boggling that you can be in prison, conceivably for what is now going to be half of your life as a 20-year-old. You spend the next 20 years in prison. 20-something-year-old, it's like, yeah, you would have spent more in your life in prison than not, and you still don't have the wherewithal to realize that, hey, maybe I didn't do it the way it was supposed to be done.
Yeah, I mean, and like I didn't really get mad at him until after the pardon, because like we got wind of it when Twist died, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Twist, that was we had Kerner who died of cancer.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about all these guys because
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier at the top about the platoon sort of being cursed after all this happened. You had a rash of guys who had died for one reason or another. You mentioned the cancer. I think one was a DUI accident, and then Twist.
I've got my feelings about Carson and Rule both.
Well, I'd like you to just kind of to talk about them for a moment. So just as callous as it sounds, run down the list.
Yeah. I mean, Kerner died of cancer that they only found after his IED injury, and he was 20, 21 years old. Haynes died from an aneurysm that was likely caused by his injuries, where he was paralyzed from like nipple down, armpit down, I believe. Rule got into an altercation where he ended up discharging his pistol into his own stomach. He bled out and died. Carson died in a truck accident, and then Twist shot himself. But I don't care what anybody says. Rule and Carson, those were suicides. They didn't know how to deal with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing the same things I was doing. They were trying to treat everything with booze and not talking to anybody about it, and it ate them up from the inside. And then, you couple that with some other personal struggles they had, like, it may not have been a gun in their mouth, but the behaviors were leading them that, it was suicidal behavior. And Twist, that was the one that really hit hard, because that kid thought he was going to save Afghanistan, and all he wanted to do was serve. Like, he was still in the reserves. He was a Michigan highway patrolman, and it's to the point now where if I get a phone call at like before 6 a.m., it's because I got another buddy that I get to go put in the ground, and it that made me angry. Was like, we get word that Twist had shot himself, and we're making the phone calls, we're trying to get money together for people to make it up to the funeral, we're trying to do all these things. And the producers of the documentary called me up and they're like, hey, Trump's looking at pardoning him and Goldstein and Gallagher. And I was like, what? I was like, there's no way, man. There's no way. And, we go up to Michigan, and keep in mind, I'm an Ohio State fan. So setting foot in Michigan was a big step for me. And we did it right. We were there as much as we could for Twist Widow, and his family. And, we got back, and I got back to North Carolina, and my birthday was the following weekend. And, my birthday's the 10th, Veterans Day is the 11th. And, Dave and a couple of the other producers called again, and we're like, hey, they're still looking at the pardon. And I was like, no. And then they're going to do it on Veterans Day. And I was like, oh, fuck me. Like, come on, you're going to ruin my entire weekend, And then that didn't happen. It was the following week that they decided to do it. And that pissed me off to see him released to like these adulating crowds.
Yeah.
Making the rounds on Fox and Friends and all those other,
Oh, he leveraged his position. I mean,
yeah.
And the media leveraged him for them. I mean, this was a parasitic relationship from top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean that goes into his second attorney, John Marr. That dude, he is an experienced operator, to say the least. But like that pissed me off because like you're gonna let him go out to this big crowd. You're gonna let him go on television. You're gonna let him be the fucking hero when he went to jail, right? Like he went to jail, and like you said, man, and he still didn't realize and still fails to accept you did wrong, but he's a hero. And my kids, my boys, who actually did good work there and worked their ass off to make sure that they weren't running around fucking killing civilians. They get to go into the ground and no one gives a shit. That pissed me off.
Yeah. You could tell the complete lack of humility because he embraced every second of it. I mean, there could have been some semblance of, hey, let me just get out and sort of fade into anonymity quietly and just be thankful I can go live a life. Then there is catapulting it into, hey, I'm going to be a household name for the rest of American history.
Yeah.
And I think that is the egregious part. And again, I'm not going to debate, the context of war criminals and setting. I 100% believe war criminals should be prosecuted and they should be held accountable for every single thing that they do, because accountability publicly now for the military is like, priority number one on every account, whether it's war criminals, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's, racism in the military, whatever. It's all about accountability for the organization now. So 100%. But I can't ever buy into anybody using the military for their own personal stardom, because that in and of itself belies everything that we're taught and belies everything that we believe in. It's not about me. It's not about one person. It's about all of us. And you represent something a lot bigger than just yourself, and commit a crime, get convicted of it, and then to go against every counter instinct the military has taught you in being pardoned is pretty gross and disgusting from where I sit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I laughed my ass off because he got very active on Twitter to promote his book. But he kept applying for jobs and kept getting shot down. And he screenshotted this thing from Target and was like, what's going on? I thought with my pardon, like my record was expunged and Target won't even hire me. And I'm not going to lie, dude, I got petty as fuck and was just like, like I was like, dude, fuck you. Like
you put on a red polo, pal.
Yeah. Like if this is the little bit I get, you know what? I'm going to take that, and what I find hilarious even is he's going to some second-rate fucking law school with no chance in hell to ever be a licensed practicing attorney. Like no state is going to allow him to practice law.
Yeah. Let me ask you about kind of where you are now, because what's done is done, right? He's not going back in the clink.
Yeah.
How do you and the rest of the guys, when you talk about this, when it comes up, I know you're not at peace with it, but can you find a spot for it where it's comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, that was the only way I was ever like everybody involved with like the article and the multiple articles and the documentary and all that. Like if we weren't, like you said, not okay, but like it's there. This is something that's happened. This is something that I'm going to be associated with the rest of my life. All right. we're in good headspace now. to where we can talk about it, and we can talk about our struggles, because I think that's the other important thing to draw from this is, look, all of us struggled with this, and we lost people along the way. But, you have guys that, we're fighting to get better and to keep the memory of our buddies who aren't here anymore alive. And this is those good positive examples we can talk about for veterans who get out and are struggling, right? Because like I'm kind of over the whole, the vet bro t-shirt and coffee shit, right? Like you're not helping anybody, dude. Like let's actually show people, yo, it's okay to suck. Well, we were all there once, it's okay. But how do we bounce back from that? How do we get better from that? I think that is important, and I think a lot of the guys in the platoon, they have done that, like Zettel's getting ready to get out of the Army. He's going to go, start the next phase of his life. Reynoso is like a t-shirt designer and a professional bodybuilder. Fucking Morrissey's a first sergeant now. God forbid. I didn't even see that happening. When I got him as a U4, a lot of guys have just stepped in and done these great things after having dealt with this. And it's a moral injury. Like, how do you wrap your head around that, knowing that, one, we really couldn't have stopped it, right? We couldn't have stopped it. But how do you carry on after it happens, And a lot of guys it's taken us a lot, myself included, to figure out how to deal with that. And me, dude, my ass is in therapy still once a week, and I still work those, those grief steps, like doing breathing exercises. I do a lot of yoga, like it every bit helps, man, and I'm so impressed by everything these guys have done. And, they've only kind of made me better and helped me along with me getting my shit together. So I am in a good enough space to talk about it.
Do you think that Twist and the other guys would still be here if Clint Lorance was never part of this equation?
Yes. I mean, Kerner, it's hard to say. I mean, that poor kid, cancer is
right. I mean, I'm talking about the guy, the guy who asserted all were suicides. Those in particular.
I believe they would still be here, because it's, you and I have both dealt with loss like this, guys who they didn't know how to wrap their hands around it to fight through it, or they were so proud that they just thought going and talking to somebody or doing other things, they couldn't do that, but like, I believe in my heart that they would still be here if he never was introduced into our lives.
Where are you with your military service at this point? As you said, I mean, you're never not going to be connected to Clint Lorance. And, while the world may not know the name Mike McGuinness and its relation to Clint Lorance, they'll always know his name. But every time you hear it, it's going to conjure up something. So where are you with your own personal service to the country? Are you let down by the Army and the military? Did they abandon you when they weren't supposed to? Did they not back you up the way they were supposed to? How do you reconcile all that?
I made peace with the fact that I really believed higher headquarters was never going to help us early on, right? Like, I knew they weren't going to. They wiped their hands clean of it, especially when I saw how quickly they did the battalion and brigade change out when we got home. Like, fuck, the trial hadn't even started yet. They were still doing the investigation, and they moved out 2 entire command teams. Which
is so crazy, because in reality, like you said, you weren't allowed to go anywhere because you were under investigation. The whole command team shouldn't have been able to move until the investigation was complete.
That's how I was led to believe by the 15-6 investigating officer.
Right. Well, that's typically standard operating procedure.
Yeah. But like, I knew that they weren't going to help, and I made my peace with that. But like right now, and to be brutally honest, I don't tell anybody I ever served. The people I met were the best part of my service. And that's how I look at it. I leave it at that. I was disillusioned with the war after my, the second deployment coming home. Hey, we got bin Laden, but why are we still fucking around there? Right. And then seeing the toll it had started taking on all my brothers and sisters in uniform, I'm like, this isn't worth it. You know, like I've got guys, like I turned 40 and I'm held together with duct tape and a prayer. I can't imagine, right? Like guys like my buddy Sammy, who was wounded on the deployment, who's missing 2 limbs. Like I can't imagine, you know? And it's just like, you know, I ask myself this all the time, you know, was the juice worth the squeeze? You know, and I'll tell you no, not with my physical, you know, the physical issues I have, and especially the mental struggles. I don't know, man. Like, I'm so proud I got to serve with the guys I served with. That's what I'm very proud about. Right. But the organization at large can fuck itself. I mean, if we're just being brutally honest, man.
Tangentially, with the proposed pullout of Afghanistan this year, did it sort of shake any feelings loose?
Well, I mean, when I was still in school, because I got degrees in journalism and history. When we first got the you know, the frago about, hey, we're getting on to Afghanistan in like 2019, I wrote a whole page in our school newspaper about it. Right.
Really?
And
send it. I'd like to read it.
All right, yeah, not a problem. And I actually had the clipping. But you know, I was like, this should happen a long time ago, is essentially what I said. And you know, it was a big step because, like I said, I never told anybody in school. I was just an old fucking guy going to college with a bunch of young kids, you know. But you know, I essentially let the entire campus know. You know, I have friends who were affected so much by their service there. With what gain? You know, what was the payoff? You know, you know, but that's essentially the argument. This is a good thing. We need to get out of there. And you know, when I see people, you know, I don't want to say argue, when I advocate for that fact, you know, people are like, what about the people there? I'm like, dude, I'm gonna tell you right now, if you really gave a shit about the people there, you would have got involved with like an NGO or some other thing and went over there and actually helped them. I was like, so just take that argument out of your mouth and try me again, try something else. Okay. Because like, I've been there. I spent almost 3 years of my life in that country, and they are beautiful people. And I feel horrible for what they've had to endure for 45 years, you know? But having the United States there is not going to stop anything, and it's not going to solve anything, you know?
And that way, 1,000 years.
Yeah. You know, and on top of that, you know, I can't remember who wrote it, and I wish I did, because I'd love to like give them the credit for it. But, you know, we didn't, you know, this war isn't 20 years old. It's not one 20-year war. It's 21-year wars, you know? Like nobody, there's no continuity. There's nothing. This was not going to end well for us anyway. Right. And so that's how I look at it, man. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm, you know, I've spoken out against recruiting in high schools. You know, again, I think we should have a little older people if you want to serve. Hey, I can't say anything about it. I did it for a long time, but I think you should be older. You should not be an 18-year-old kid, you know?
It's a lot to ask of a kid that young.
Yeah. You know,
you don't realize what we put them through at such a young age.
You know, like for me, the service is something I did. What's more important for me is being a dad, you know, being a good journalist, which I'm still working on. You know, I'm studying to take the LSAT. You know, I want to go into labor law. You know, like those things are way more at the top of my list of things that are important to me than being a vet, you know. And would it have been different if this shit didn't happen? I don't know, maybe, possibly, most, you know, more than likely, but that's not how it is now. You know, and trust me, I catch hell from the community about that all the time. You know, they're like, well, why? You know, why do you feel that way? Well, dude, go ahead and just do a couple years after 2012 in my shoes, and then come back and talk shit to me, you know, like.
Well, on its basic premise, you ended up being punished and having the thing that you love the most taken away from you because you did the right thing. And that sentence doesn't add up. It's not supposed to add up that way.
Yeah.
Especially in an organization that is, and I'll air quote this here, value-based the way the Army is. And I don't say, I say it a little bit tongue in cheek and sarcastic, but you know, I've been doing this for 22 years.
Yeah.
And there are people who live the Army values. There are other people who don't. And guess what? They collect the same paycheck every 15th and 30th of the month. And so that's problematic. And I don't say, and I would never say that people in our organization are infallible. And at the same respect, I don't think being perfect should be the enemy of good. In any organization, you're going to have bad seeds. You're going to have bad apples. You're going to have bad actors. I mean, you're never going to root out everybody who is going to bring some sort of negative influence in. But the people who do right and the people who stay right and the people who follow right should never be punished for doing so. And that's the other collateral damage for this, is that yourself and your platoon mates, who all had the personal courage, again, Army value, and the integrity, Army value, and the honor, here we go, I'll throw them all in there if I can get them in there, to do what you did. It was thrown back in your face at the highest levels of our organization. Problem, difficult. It's as a parent, it's counter to what you teach your kids. Yeah. Kids tell the truth every single time, and guess what? I'm still going to do the exact opposite that outcome that you expect. No, that's not the way we teach our kids.
I mean, but that's been a structural issue within the military for a long time. Yes.
When you have a rank-based organization, that possibility always exists. Always. So you don't tell people you serve. Do you think you'll get to a place one day where you tell your kids about it?
Well, my kids, my daughter's 12, and she remembers me being in the military. My son's a little younger, but he doesn't really.
I don't know your experience, I guess, as well.
Yeah. I mean, I give it to them. They asked what I did, and I said I was an infantry guy, and they were like, well, what's that? And I said, well, I was one of the idiots that went out and directly got shot at. And they were like, why did you do that? Isn't there like desk jobs? And I'm like, yeah, there is. And I should have grabbed one when I had a chance.
In his younger years.
Yeah. But I told him, that, some things happened in my career. And when you're older, and if I deem it, important for you to know, we can talk about it. But I don't want my kids to know I went through that. I don't want that. It's just like, it's for a long time, it was hard to talk about this because you got the look, people are like, oh, they either felt so sorry for you or they just wanted to rip your face off because you betrayed your PL. Right. And it's just like, I don't, there's a lot going on with this, man, and so I choose not to. Like, if somebody listens to this and sees me on the street and asks me about it, sure, we can sit down and talk, because I'm at that spot in my life, but like for my kids, I don't ever want them to look at me differently, so maybe when they get a little older, sure, we can sit down and talk. I'm just worried that one of them's going to pony up the money and go get stars when they move out of the fucking house. And then I have no choice because it's just going to be right there at the push of a button.
Yeah, right. The betrayal thing it's interesting you bring that up, because betrayal is sort of, it can be applied to many different things in this. Let's start with the most basic betrayal of the oath of office that Lorance took, right? I mean, there's a betrayal there to follow the orders of the officers appointed over you, and clearly none of the orders were to shoot civilians. That's always been there. I don't call what you guys did a betrayal. I call it doing the right thing. But then the betrayal again of your higher chain of command, who left you guys out there to dry. I mean, it's funny how, again, in a honor-based organization, there seems to be lacking a lot of honor on multiple fronts in this whole situation here. And again, also counterintuitive. When you hear the idea that you betrayed your unit or your PL, how does that resonate? What's the reaction there?
Well, I mean, now I just laugh like directly in people's faces when they say it. Because honestly, I get, say there's 10 people that think that way, right? 2 of them actually served, and I get it. You're going to have strong feelings about it. That's fine. Sorry, they're fellow veteran, go about your day. Then you have the other 8, right, who read like Don Brown's book, which is like the scribblings of a small child with a law degree that he just threw into like 180 pages, right? Um, and then you have a lot of the people that just kind of read news clippings or, just are so pro America, but then, they themselves have never served, right? So, but they're like armchair quarterbacks or armchair generals and shit like that, right? Them, I will give the time of day to laugh directly in their face. You should have no strong feeling about this, man. Like, Clint Lorance is nothing to you. Like, honestly, if it didn't fit into a certain narrative in your head, you wouldn't even give a shit about him.
It wouldn't be a big deal. Yeah. I mean, that's the other, given the politically charged climate we're in, that this whole thing sits in, unfortunately, again, because the politicization of the military is a major issue that we're struggling with. I wanted to ask you, has anybody reached out to you, higher ranking people who anonymously served or anything? Has anybody ever reached out to you and just said, thank you for having the courage to stand up and do what you did?
Well, the first battalion commander I had when we reflagged in 2501, Colonel Mark Purdy, I'm always going to appreciate that man, because he pulled my ass out of the training room when he saw the MTO and was like, why is a fucking staff sergeant sitting in your training room? And why isn't he training soldiers? So my first sergeant was like, well, I guess we're going to throw him to a platoon. I ended up working for another staff sergeant that only had like 8 years in the military total. And he's like, hey man, my name is Brian Retz. I'm like, hey boss, what do you need me to do? And it was a great fucking working relationship. And the first field problem we do, like, I'm training brand new kids on machine gun tactics, which, I don't give a shit what anybody says. To run a good machine gun team takes a lot of work. It's not just point and shoot. And that, we ran 4 iterations straight, complete with breaking everything back down, moving back out. That way we can reset up the ground mounts, walk everybody through everything the way we're supposed to. And Colonel Purdy pulled me aside that night after we finished up. And he's like, Mac, thank you for being willing to do this, because he's like, you could have just told me to go fuck myself. And I said, sir, 1, no, I couldn't. I've already been in enough trouble the last few years. The last thing I need to do is tell the new guy to go fuck himself. And 2, I'm getting a chance to train soldiers again. Like, this is the fun part of the gig, and he was just really cool about it. And he tried like hell to keep me in. But, at a certain point, I even sat down and asked him, I'm like, don't stick your neck out on this one. Don't do that. Because if, I was like, this whole thing's bad. Right. And what I did was wrong. And I can't tell anybody how sorry I am for what I did. I put people's lives at risk. I fucked up bad. I accept responsibility for what I did. And this is what the Army is now. Like, this is how it goes. I shouldn't get special treatment just because, I needed to go to the hospital. Right. I was like, that should have happened years ago, not just that night, So, I mean, he was just like, well, I feel like I have to do something. I'm like, sir, all I'm saying is don't stick your neck out on this one. Okay. Don't be that guy that tries to keep a DUI guy in, don't do that. But he's always been there for me. Always.
How much you talked about putting people's lives at danger, and you're referencing your DUI and everything else. How much do you blame yourself for those 2 innocent Afghans who were killed?
I mean, for a long time, I blamed myself directly, because I should have just ran up and beat the shit out of them. Like, that's where my head was.
That wouldn't have stopped it. You know that, right?
Yeah.
You physically couldn't have gotten there in time.
Yeah. But, at a certain point, I realized, like, I couldn't control everything. I still can't. And that's okay. And again, years of therapy, got to undo all that stuff. Right. But I mean, I slowly learned that I couldn't have stopped Twist. I couldn't have stopped Nick. I couldn't have stopped Rule. I couldn't have stopped those things. What I can do, is miss those guys. What I can do is be sorry and empathetic to the families of those 2 men that aren't here anymore. And I am. I hate that they have a hole in their life that they are never going to be able to fill, that the United States Army just decided to throw a bunch of cash at, thinking it would fill it, right? that's where I'm at. Like, it's okay to hurt. It's just how we process it correctly. And it goes back to what I started out saying. The military does not teach us how to deal with grief and how to deal with that kind of hurt. You know, so it's kind of incumbent on any type of leader to realize that, this type of hurt, it manifests itself in different ways, and to be on the lookout and also be understanding and empathetic when that person decides to like go out and try and get help and fix it. Dude, you've been in the Army longer than I have, but like, how many years do we hear it's okay to take care of yourself? And when a kid went and did it, they had massive blowback from it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, we have to get away from that shit, because, things pop off, they pop up, and you know what? It does a disservice, not just to that soldier, but if you want to be like a really selfish prick, it's also a disservice to your own person, because it's going to inconvenience you, or whatever the case is. We just need to be more open-minded about being empathetic and getting our service members the help when they need it, and without it negatively affecting their career.
Yeah. And we're still processing the last 20 years of war, in a sense, in the big picture. We haven't taken a knee from 20 years of war to give ourselves the moment to realize that, hey, we need to pull our military back from doing X, Y, and Z things right now and give them a chance to breathe and come up and hit a really hard reset button. But there are people who never wear a uniform, wearing suits and ties and business casual wear and whatnot, making those decisions for us on a routine basis. And we have too many people who wear the uniform in bed with politicians that sort of back those decisions, right?
Well, I mean, Smedley Butler said it best himself. War's a racket. Like, we are not.
Oh, it's the biggest business in America.
Yeah, and until people start realizing that shit, I honestly, dude, I don't think we're gonna get that knee, because look, I mean, fuck, the current administration is like dropping bombs, in Syria and in Iraq right now. Like, dude, you're talking about, like, let's face it, it's not a pullout. We're still gonna have what he said, 650 people in Afghanistan.
The part is what no one realizes, that we dropped those bombs on ISIS militias who attacked soldiers in Iraq. And we all forgot that we pulled out of Iraq 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are we still doing there?
So it's like
that we just sort of glossed over the fact that the attacks went on soldiers in Iraq where we're not supposed to be anymore because we pulled out of there. Yeah. So when we say we pulled out of Afghanistan, we're just really kidding.
Yeah. And it's like, people have to stand up and start saying something. Like, dude, we've had this horrible, horrible track of murders and suicides in Fort Hood and sexual assaults, right? And on top of that, it's happening here at Bragg. It's happening at Fort Bragg right now. Fort Bragg's had almost 50 unaccountable deaths in the last calendar year, right? Like, and in the Army, especially these division commanders, like, well, what are we doing? Well, sir, part of it falls on you, right? Stop sitting there with your hand up your ass, like, let's get down to brass tacks and start doing something. Like those command climate surveys, guys, it's okay to read it. I promise. All right. If you have service members in your ranks that are having issues, let's try and solve them. And you know what? It's okay. It is totally okay to just say, you know what? Fuck it. We're going to open white space on this day, and let's get behavioral health. Let's get mental health. Let's get some people in there, and let's get this fucking fixed. That way we don't have any more Vanessa Guillen's. We don't have any more, of these fucking murders at Bragg, like we have to fix this shit.
Yeah. Well,
and that does involve, like you said, taking that knee. We have to take that knee.
Can't increase lethality when you're doing a sensing session. So tell any 06 who's trying to pick up a flag for their career that we need you to forego lethality for emotion. See how well that goes over.
Yeah.
Like a fart in church. And that's just, again, and I'm not openly disparaging the organization, which I've been part of a long time, but I am acknowledging the flaws, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think us looking introspectively at our organization and finding ways to make us better should be something that I should be worried about saying out loud in a public forum. But nonetheless, there are people who wear a uniform would scoff at what I just said as sort of disparaging the military. No, I don't think of that at all. I think it's incumbent on leaders in our organization to look introspectively and figure out ways that we can maximize what we have. And some of that includes, hey, dude, take a break. Take 5. It's okay. Guess what? It's until they show up on our soil again. Guess what? You got time to take a quick pause.
Yeah. And it's like, and I really agree with that. What you said about, you're disparaging the military. No, it's not. It's okay. If it's critical, that's all right. You have to be critical, even of yourself, so you can fix things and get better, right? That's not disparagement. Like you said, it's being introspective and finding out, okay, this is broken. How do we fix it? Which again goes back to what we both learned while we were in the military, right?
100%. Well, Mike, I mean, there's part of me that wishes there was a magic wand that I could wave and sort of disconnect you from this, because the legacy that you have extends beyond that 24-hour period that forever changed your life. And part of me is sad that you're in a spot where, you don't tell a lot of people that you served, and it causes you somewhat pain. But in the same respect, I can totally understand where you are, and whatever keeps you at peace, whatever keeps you closer to your family, whatever keeps you getting out of bed another day with a smile on your face is what I am 100% unequivocally supporting for you in your life. And however you're getting there every day, and however anybody from the rest of your platoon is getting there every day is what is probably most paramount, and what I take away from your whole personal story, that as long as there are guys and gals getting up every day, well, in your case, guys only in your platoon, but who are still willing to put their feet down for another day on this earth, then I think that's something we should all support. So I thank you for opening up to us and sharing all of the details of this whole thing, and being so honest and forthright, and just I think your voice is an important one, and I hope that you are comfortable enough to continue to tell your story and your side of this story that needs to be heard whenever you're asked about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to stop. It took a toll on Fitzgerald because he was the first one to get out, and he carried this load by himself for a few years. So when I got out, I was like, Fitzy, you can just go back to being snarky and witty, and I will be the asshole up front, and that's, it's essentially what we do. Typically we all get in a group chat like, hey, are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? We had, an organization that was contesting the, it's a fucking pack, right? I just don't want to go blasting it to the world because I'm not in the mood to deal with their ass on social media. But they asked us if we wanted to like film an anti, Trump commercial. And we were like, no, absolutely not. No, and then they were just like, well, are you guys pro Trump? I was like, some of us are. I was like, me personally, I'm not, but no, you're not going to turn what we went through into a political chip. I was like, that's not, no, but yeah, man, it's important. And I'm always going to speak out about this because, it's okay to, especially as Americans, we have this great pride in the military, and to a point, I think it's weird kind of to have kind of like that adulation. But I also understand at the same time. But we also need to realize, again, going into that critical thinking, there are people that do bad things in this uniform. And it's always been that way. Like you said, there's bad apples, bad actors, just fucking awful people, right? And it's okay to call that out and say, hey, this was wrong. This was an awful thing that happened. And not everybody in uniform is a saint. I hate to break anybody's, right, worldview there, but, we're people too. And there are some of us good and some of us bad, and some of us make mistakes, and, others not so much, so like it's, the veneration, like being proud is one thing, but don't venerate like that. That's where I'm at. Like, if you're to be proud of the people that represent your country, okay, but don't venerate that. I think that's the biggest issue we're having right now, because then, like you said, we have this politicization of the military, where one side gets to claim them, and then they get angry when everything doesn't go their way. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Yeah. And the only thing that's worse than the politicization is the commercialization now of the military. Yeah, let's have military appreciation day because it sells tickets. Wonderful. Good job, everybody. Different discussion for a different day. But I want everybody to go check out the column by Greg Jaff in the Washington Post. It's also in Stars and Stripes. You can find it online. Really kind of details things in as much detail as we talked about. But more importantly, it gives you more of the insights of the lives of Twist and some of the other guys who are part of this platoon that are no longer with you. And I think hearing their backgrounds and their stories and keeping their memory alive is vitally important. And honestly, what I want people to take away from this is not to forget those men who are no longer with us, because their sacrifice is a big part of this story. And so again, Mike McGuinness, I certainly appreciate you spending some time with us. It's back to, one of our longer episodes here, but worth every second. So again, thank you for your time, brother. You stay well, continued success, continued health. Best of luck with every endeavor you're approaching going forward, man.
Hey, thank you very much.
All right, Mike McGuinness, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to Killcliff's YouTube channel, download the Killcliff app as well. You can catch all of our episodes there. And don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Killcliff's Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.